Welcome to Tales from SYL Ranch, now live on YouTube and Twitch, but not on Facebook because I am in a permanent time out. And I'm Bill Stone. Tonight on Tales from SYL Ranch, we have the usual weekly current Lancaster County, Nebraska virus statistics for where I live. We will talk about how Vice President Harris believes that people in rural areas do not have access to modern technology. We'll talk about Cuba, censorship, ratting out your friends and family, the current government Jehovah's Witnesses, a review of Superman and Lois Season 1, Episode 12, and anything else that you can think of. As you can see from the long list of topics tonight, some weeks, I go and I have a hard time figuring out what to talk about. And then there are some weeks that are just incredibly eventful, and that was this week's. I would mention, as I said at the top, I am currently in a Facebook timeout. I don't know when I'll get out of the timeout. It seems like it's slowly restoring some of the abilities that I had before, but I'm still not able to post quite normally on the group that's associated. I have a page for this for the channel, but I also have a group for the channel as well. Page works, except I can't do videos, and the group doesn't quite work. So hopefully that'll get over eventually. This is, of course, a live stream, so you're free to talk with me about anything that you want to in chat. You can ask me any question, whether it's political, social, the virus whose name I can't mention on the YouTube side, without risking the video being outright banned. United States, Civil War II, or even things pertaining to science fiction, fantasy, horror, superheroes, and other related genres. I am happy to answer each and every question in as much detail and as truthfully as I can. There are some personal subjects that I won't discuss, but pretty much anything else is fair game. Now, I will get to as many of my viewers as possible with the understanding that I don't want the stream to go much longer than 3 hours. Of course, given the number of topics, it risks doing that. Partly because I have lower back arthritis because I'm a old man, but also 2 days ago, I managed to seriously screw up my sciatic nerve. Went to the doctor about it, got an injection. I'm on some painkillers. But the fact is, when I'm not sitting perfectly vertical or sitting in a way that my back doesn't move very much, it's a new experience in pain. So if it starts to feel like my back is starting to go, I'll cut it short. What percentage of the universe's mass is dark matter? Marshall says. I don't know. It's an inordinately high, so high that I think when you start getting into something that you can neither see nor actually prove, maybe it's time that you go back to the drawing board on your theories. So while I waited for a few people to trickle in, I will answer the question that nobody asked. What are this week's current Lancaster County, Nebraska virus statistics for where I live? As always, I source this with the City of Lincoln, Lancaster County Health Department, link in the description box. It's an interesting little site. You might go there just to see how, I think at least in terms of the presentation, somebody's doing it right. I've been to other sites that show things about the virus that are not as easy to read, and I think this one is well done. Some of my statistics that I'm going to present are not the same as the Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department's website, but that's because I am using a more accurate count of the county's population. Essentially, they have sat and lowballed the population so that the statistics look better. Hey, Jeanette, how are you doing? Yes, I know you asked. Jeanette is my local viewer. Glad to have you in tonight live for as long as you can be. As always, the current Lincoln Lancaster County population rests at roughly 324,216. Number of deaths is up 1 to 240. That was up, just by the way, in the last 24 hours. I happened to check yesterday. As always, for comparison, I like to mention the number of people who died of heart disease in 2019 alone was 485, which means that over a year and a half of this pandemic, less than half of the number of people who died of heart disease in 1 year have died of this pandemic. So my way of thinking is, if this virus represents a pandemic in Lancaster County, then heart disease must be an ongoing health disaster. The total number of Lancaster County people who have been confirmed as having the virus is at 31,710, which is up 425 from last week. That's kind of unprecedented. That's an uptick that we haven't seen in quite a long time. I'm not sure quite what to make of it. We need to wait a week or two and see whether this uptick is significant or if it's just a bump. Interestingly enough, I happened to glance at it, and I haven't been tracking these numbers, but the number of people who have been tested for the virus is at 193,088, which makes the percentage of the number of the people tested out of the population at 59.555%. Hang on to that number for a second. 59.555%. The number of positive cases classified as recovered is 30,000 and, sorry, I lost it on my thing there, 30,945, which is up 2,052 from last week. As always, I don't quite know what this classification means, but given there's only 240 deaths, I guess that leaves about 525 people in some kind of Schrodinger's cat-style limbo, as both dead and not dead simultaneously. However, that is 25 more people this week that are now officially classified as alive. The total number of completed vaccinations is at 170,048, which is up a rather astonishing 25,772 from last week. I am not sure what to make of that. That is the single largest increase by an order of magnitude that we've ever had. However, it makes the percentage of the population that has been vaccinated at 52.449%. Now, that number I gave earlier, the discrete number, the scalar number of individuals who've been tested, was 52.55%. This is 52.499%. It's almost the same. That number of people who've been tested boggles my mind. That was not the number of tests, because they give a different number for that. That's the actual scalar number of individuals who have been tested. That number represents more than half of the population of this county. I may go through and do some statistics about what, in terms of vital statistics, how many people in the county are adults versus children, because I would have to assume, if we say that the county's made up of, 50 or so percent adults, that would be more, or even some lower percentage. I mean, that's all of the adults plus a bunch of the children. That is such a weird number. I guess I have to take it as read, but it's still a weird number. In any case, with this, all of these stats, we can say really that, if we look at the rates of increase, rates of decrease, really this vaccine really has yet to have the slightest impact on decreasing number of cases or deaths. Deaths as a percentage of confirmed cases is at 0.757%, up 0.003% from last week. It is statistically identical for months now. Deaths as a percentage of population is at 0.74%, up 0.0012% from last week. Statistically identical since the pandemic started. So, got 3 to 5 viewers, not sure how many exactly, because they tend to lie to me on the YouTube side, and at least one viewer is sitting over on the Twitch side. Hello to both sides. I want to talk about something stupid that Vice President Harris said this week. Astonishingly enough to me, Vice President Harris was on one of those stupid interview shows, the kind that used to throw pretty hardball questions at President Trump and totally softballs everything in sight at either, Biden or Harris. And she answered some stupid question when they were talking about, voter ID and stuff like that. And she answered a dumbass question with a dumbass answer. The dumbass answer she gave was that people in rural areas have a really hard time copying their IDs because they're not near a Kinko's or something like that. This tells you just how totally out of contact with reality Vice President Harris is. I do not remember the last time as an urbanite that I used a Kinko's. I don't remember. I mean, I remember using them when I was in college getting my bachelor's 25 plus years ago, but I don't remember the last time I ever used one. because I mean, when do I need, most of the time, when do I need those kind of numbers of copies? The only time I would go to a Kinko's or something like that is if I need a whole bunch of copies, such that what I use, like everybody else, my multifunction printer. What if I only would go to a Kinko's if I needed a whole bunch of copies where I just didn't want to spend the ink on my inkjet printer? I'm trying to remember when the last time I went to a Kinko's was. I can't remember. It may have been 15 to 20 years ago now. I just don't remember. I think I remember something when my kids were young, which would make it 20 or so years ago. And you know the reason that I don't use Kinko's? It's because I have a multifunction printer. You know, it does scanning, it does printing, it does copying. If I had a fax machine, if I had a landline phone, which nobody does, to plug into the damn thing, it could do faxing if I wanted to. And if you think for 1 nanosecond that your average farmer or rancher doesn't have one of those, you're nuts. They have only been on the market for 20 to 30 years. Everybody has one. Vice President Harris, you're completely out of touch with reality. A, to not know that these have been on the market for so long that they're not even terribly expensive. You can get a low-end one for well under $200. I mean, apparently you have been in government so long that you don't know what it's like to have, your own computing equipment. When you want to copy something, it either goes off as an email document or you hand a piece of paper to somebody and they go take care of it for you. So you're not aware that Kinko's is almost out of business. I mean, they've had to, Kinko's and places like that, they've had to branch out, Vice President Harris. Kinko's doesn't just do copies now. They're also a shipping place, right? They will oftentimes, places like that will have what amounts to post office boxes there for shipping companies. They will ship and receive for you if you want, with FedEx and all that. Kinko's can't make money just copying now. They haven't been able to for a long time. You're completely out of contact with reality. Yes, Marshall says, and I was about to get to it, the concept of smartphones. What do you think they're running around out there with? Do you actually think they're going out and they're the only people left to have a landline? Because trust me, out there, a smartphone is just about the most useful thing that you can have. Because you're out in, if you're a rancher, like at my, my family's ranch land, where this is the interior of the cabinet. If you're out there and you're out checking cattle and you're, off in a field someplace and your wife or your kids want to get a hold of you, they're not going to walk all the way out there or trek out there in a pickup truck. They're going to pick this thing up and call them. What do you think they have? Circa 2000 flip phones? You're completely out of contact with reality. Just completely out of contact with reality. And this surprises me because you come from California, right? You were an elected official in California. And elected officials in California is geographically, if you just look at geographics, more rural in terms of the amount of land area that's rural than it is with city. Yes, there's no question that their entire political scene is completely dominated by the West Coast urban areas, but a huge percentage of that land is agricultural. What world are you living in? Okay, catch you later, Jeanette. I know Jeanette does modding for a stream that goes on. Catch you later. Hope I get to the point where I need a mod. Anyway, Vice President Harris, you're completely out of contact with reality. Marshall says she was stupid in California, apparently increasingly her idiot capacity over time. Yes, Freedom Fighter 57 says that's what I have. You have a flip phone? Really? I'm surprised by that. Out in South Dakota ranchland, I've seen, people in my family who are out there, and they have these. But in any case, I don't know anybody out there who doesn't have a multifunction printer. I mean, it's just common sense, and they're not that expensive. But what this really says to me, and this, by the way, Vice President Harris, is why you have difficulty getting votes in rural states. Not only do you not understand that the overwhelming majority of the population in rural states is actually urban, you don't get that. You look at like Nebraska, and the overwhelming majority of our land area is agricultural, but the overwhelming majority of our population is in Omaha of about 1 million, Lincoln, Lancaster County, which is 324,000. You get off to our third largest city. It's in the 100,000 plus ish range. That's where most of our population is. You don't get that. But Marcia says you have one of the old Matrix style slider phones, as in collectible, not as in use device. Actually, I'm not going to go get it because it'll kill my back to stand up. But I actually have a wall mounted, landline phone as a collectible, because my kids don't know what that thing is. But the reason that rural states don't want to vote for you nitwits is precisely because of you being totally out of contact with reality like that. You don't understand what modern agriculture is like. And I've talked about this on this show before, and I'll talk about it again because one of the stated objectives of this show is to attempt to educate urbanites as to the realities of modern agriculture. I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska. Rotary or DTMF, it's DTMF. My father somewhere had an actual phone with the, circa about 1940 or 30. Excuse me, I don't know where that's gotten off to. I should find out, because that really is a cool kind of collectible. It's a very cool phone. And he got it to work on standard landline phones. He had to install a DTMF dialer on it to get it to work, but he got it to work. If you're in 5 to 57, you have everything else. Could see years ago what they're using, smartphone, how to track and trace. Yeah, that's problematic. I have one because, to be honest, except when I'm doing this or doing some recording and stuff, it really has become my standard computer. I have this one that I've shown off before, which is a fold-out phone. And that's because I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and it is really easier to do it on this size screen than it is on this ish side. So I do have this one, and I've had one since forever. I'm one of Verizon's very first customers. Really. Verizon Wireless's very first customers. I talk to their tech support people, and when I tell them how long I've been doing this, because I tend to talk to tech support people because I was in support at various times, and I will talk to them and, say things like, okay, here's who you're talking to. I get what's going on. You have a suckage job. I'm at a higher level. Let's go from there. And I'll talk to them from time to time, and they'll say, oh, yeah, I've been here about 2 years. And I'm like, I've been with your company for like 25. That is, by the way, if you're talking to sales or something like that, that's usually bringing that up is a good way to get some money off. But anyhow, as I say, one of the stated goals of this channel is to kind of educate urbanites. And that's because, I grew up in Lincoln when it was at the time about 150,000 people. Moved from there to Chicago, and discovered when I moved there were people who did not know, who actually thought, and these were fairly educated people, who didn't know that food is not produced on site at the grocery store. I mean, that sounds kind of silly, but honestly, there were people who didn't know that. I got away for the longest time when I moved there. They would say to me, what's life like in Nebraska? And the answer is, if you're coming out of any kind of city, is, having been in Chicago a while, well, it's basically the same as Chicago, only in Chicago there's a lot more of it. But, in terms of what you can get, the amenities and everything like that, it's just the same. It's a same kind of city. There's nothing here in Lincoln, Nebraska you can't get in Chicago. And in fact, that gap is closing over time. When I first moved to Chicago, they still had comics stores, and there were a couple of them, and a specialty science fiction bookstore that you really didn't have in Lincoln. Did have one that was rather cool in Omaha, but didn't really have that in Lincoln. Now those comic stores are closing down. because the people in comics can't make a product that anyone wants to buy. It's fascinating. There's a guy on YouTube that I follow, Nerderotic, really cool guy if you're into comics and science fiction, fantasy, etc. Good guy to follow, Nerderotic. But he had been running a comic store for a long, long time, and finally had to shut it down because the nitwits in charge of the comic book industry have gone woke. And what a surprise, nobody wants to buy their crap. Not too long ago, within the last month, Captain America was shown in his comic questioning the whole American dream. Is this really possible? Blah, blah, blah. What about inclusion? Blah, blah, blah. And when Captain America starts coming down on America, that means you've gone way too damn woke. And as a consequence, nobody wants to buy the product, and the comic stores are shutting down. There were, in fact, 2 comic stores here in Lincoln for the longest time. I almost got an assistant manager position at one of them many, many years ago. I think there may be still one left, but the comics industry itself is killing the comics store. Traded Tape. Okay, Freedom Fighter, you're local here. All right. Traded Tape, I believe, is the one that still survives. Yes. Traded Tape isn't in the same place it was. That got expanded out to the Leeds Center, but it moved down the street a ways. I believe they're still open. Don't quote me on that because I haven't gone to a comic store in a long, long time. For me, it became impossible to cost justify the price of a comic. But they were the last I knew. It jarred me because I used to go in there when I was in college a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. When I used to go to UNL, I would go in there from time to time because he would cash my payroll checks. He'd cash them outright. And I went in there, I guess about 3 or 4 years ago, and discovered what a shock that the guy who had been older than me by a good 10 years, looks like he's older than me by a good 10 years. Just completely shattered my memory of him. Not that I should have been surprised about it. Anyhow, as I say, the answer to the question I used to get, the real answer. Marshall says when you trade story quality for ideological advocacy, you will always lose customers. Yeah, and the comic stores are pointing out that what's really killing in the market now is manga, Japanese comics. This doesn't surprise me at all because those guys are probably the furthest from woke that you could possibly get. You're talking about an animation and comics industry that has a subgenre of hentai. This is about as far from that as you can get. My hope is that eventually AT&T will discover that owning DC Comics sucks, can't fire everybody, and then hire me as their new editor-in-chief. Yes, Freedom Fighter. Remember when he's talking about Traded Tape, which is a place that did this stuff, rented out record albums. Yeah. They also did records way back when. Yes. I don't know that they're open still. I'd have to check. I know there's a record store in Omaha that's in the old market that I used to go to that's still open. And they used to have a very cool science fiction, fantasy-ish bookstore, the name of which escapes me, that was out in suburban Bellevue. That was very, very cool. I was very unhappy when that closed down. But it's been a long time. Like, I think they closed down in the mid-90s or something like that. Anyhow, as I say, when I moved to Chicago, people ask me, what's life like in Lincoln? And the answer is, well, it's just like it is here, except there's a lot more of it here. But for fun, because, I'm coming out of Nebraska, what I used to tell them was, well, I had a gunfight with Indians, but then the day before I left, but then I had to swim in the Pacific, and so it was all cool. They bought it. It got to the point where I would say that frequently enough, and too many people would buy it, that it wasn't funny anymore. Because I'd suddenly have to, I assumed they would laugh, but no, they would, oh, wow, really? And I would have to just correct them. No, I'm kidding. The only Indians around really are on the reservations. They're not violent. And the Pacific Ocean is half a freaking continent away from Nebraska, like 2,500-ish miles. But that's just how generally ignorant they are. And when I was living in Des Moines, they have a children's museum there. Took my kids there one time, again, many years ago. Took the kids there one time, and they had a museum exhibit where they'd gone out in Washington, D.C., and asked people what they thought about Iowans. What do you think that's like? To a person, they would say things like, well, they wear bib overalls, maybe have a blade of grass sticking out of their mouths. And it was just like, no. The population in Iowa, just like Nebraska, is largely urban. And even where it's not, that's not what they wear. The average Iowan wears the same thing as somebody in D.C. What I'm wearing, I always like to say, is a costume. Nobody wears this stuff. This is to go along with my brand. I'm wearing a costume. You can't see it, but under here, I've got a pair of loose sweats. When I'm done, I'm going to take this stuff off, put it in the closet for next time, and put on a T-shirt, just like everybody else. Just ridiculous. So, and then another time I had a conversation. I've forgotten. It was one of the streaming services that I don't use because it's too weird to use for that. And they had a guy on there who was from Los Angeles, and he didn't have a large number of people on the stream. So I said, yeah, I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. And he just said, wow, right out in the middle of bumfrack nowhere. And I said, no, not at all. It's a city of 324,000 in the county. And he was like, wow, really? I didn't know anything like that existed. Freedom Fighter says the euphonium, I believe, in the old market used to have a lot of cool stuff, books, comics, music, but last time I was up there, they were shuttered. Doesn't surprise me. I mean, what's the market now for, music? That's going to be streaming. It's going to be, downloading and buying. It's going to be getting it on the high seas, and all of that stuff. The same thing with comics. That's dying industry because of the comics industry itself. Books are a dying industry because the vast majority of people don't want a printed book anymore. They want an electronic book. And in all honesty, I have a couple of hundred printed books, but my electronic book library now spans over 4,000 books. Over 4,000 ebooks in my library. And particularly since I got this, I tend to read on this. It's so big. Why not? It's as big as, it's about like kind of a thin, paperback. It's about that size. Anyhow, not only all of that, getting told by this guy, oh, wow, I didn't know such places existed. And then you get people like Red Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, always referred to on this show as Red Cortez because it fits. And then you get Red Cortez, who was out driving somewhere, I think it was through Texas, and it was shortly after or some period of time after Trump had won the election, at which point, because they'd lost due to the Electoral College, as you always do, you always lose due to the Electoral College, or you win because of the Electoral College, but because he won, she was going on, and all the Democrats were going on about how we need to eliminate the Electoral College, blah, 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 blah. And she's driving through Texas, and she's seeing a lot of, cattle ranching and stuff like that. And she's pointing her camera out there and doing a Snapchat where she's saying, why should this be, as this area be allowed to vote? There's nobody here. So, what smartphone model is that? This is the Samsung Galaxy Note. God, I've forgotten now. I talked about it once in the show. Let me check and see what the actual model number is. No, screw that. Okay, fine. Samsung Galaxy Note 2 Fold, I think. Galaxy Fold 2. That's what it is. Galaxy Fold 2. It's been really good for me, by the way. I was worried getting it. How is this hinge going to hold up over time? But it's been several months now, or a couple of months at least, and that hinge is in no danger of becoming problematic. The only thing you do have to remember about it is don't open it from the outside so much as open it from the hinge itself. When you open it like this, it's going to put additional pressure on it. Opening and closing with the hinge won't do that. So, all of this stuff said, part of this show's reason for existence is to educate people like Red Cortez, like Vice President Harris, because they have a totally skewed idea of what life is like in a rural area. And life in a rural area is very different. In many ways, it's very different. What I like to tell people is the difference, real big difference between rural and urban life, having spent a lot of time in both. I'm not urban now and didn't grow up urban, but I had family members in it. When I was young, I would go to my grandparents' cattle ranch in very rural South Dakota. You want to go back in time a ways. I remember when they had, for a landline phone, a party line that included everybody in the freaking valley. If you don't know, a party line is a single phone line that goes to multiple phones. It's kind of like having a landline extension. The difference is everybody picks it up. They can hear on it. They can talk on it. Anyway, that's been long gone now. But the biggest difference, the difference between really rural living and urban living is that in urban living, you're very specialized. And in rural living, you have to be very generalized. I like to point out, hey, I was in IT for, 40 years. If you want something done IT-wise, even up to programming, I was an infrastructure guy, but I can do a certain level of programming. I'm your guy. If you want me to do some of this stuff, I'm your guy. I do computer work for my next door neighbor because he's kind enough to help out when certain physical things are going on that are beyond the capability of me anymore, and certainly beyond my mother's capability. So I do computer work for him. But if you want something done with computers, I'm your dude, right? But if you want me to do anything even remotely resembling something complex with the car, I can put on a spare tire. I can change the oil if I can get underneath the car. My Jeep Wrangler, I can still get under, but the vast majority of cars are so low to the ground that you can't get under them anymore. But when you can get under a car, I can change the oil. I can check the fluids in the car. If the check engine light comes on, I know how to check some of the things. But when you get into anything else, almost anything else, forget it. I have to take it to a mechanic because I just don't know that stuff. Same thing with doctors. If a dog gets sick, I don't have any pets right now, but if we had a pet, that thing gets sick, take it to the vet. As opposed to being out in very rural South Dakota where my grandparents were. There, if you don't do something, it don't get done. If you need to, biggest example, when my grandparents passed away, we have a family cemetery out there. There's a plot for me when the time comes. We have a family cemetery out there. Well, if you have a funeral in a city or an urban area, you go out to your cemetery and you have the, the casket sometimes over, the hole in the ground, and you have a ceremony there. You go away. If you come back half an hour, 45 minutes later, burial's all done. Well, out there, if you want to bury somebody, we had a cousin with a backhoe. And he goes and digs a hole, and myself, when my grandparents passed away, myself and several of my uncles and a couple of cousins, we lowered them into the ground ourselves. If you don't do something, it don't get done. Other things out there that I can remember very distinctly. There was a portion of that land that had a severe dip in it, really bad dip, such that you didn't want cattle out there getting into it at all. So we put a fence around the dip. Well, had what they call a crawly cow, a cow that didn't care so much about the fence. Damn thing went straight down in there, got totally tangled up in barbed wire, broke two of its legs. And so when that happens, you got to do one simple thing: euthanize the thing. That's two broken legs on a cattle, forget it. Even if you called the vet out, you can't take it into town. You got to call the vet out. Even if you did, there'd be only one thing you could do. And that may sound like it's, people in rural, urban areas, that may sound like it's kind of cruel, but it's not. Because you either euthanize the thing or you leave it out for the predators to get. the coyotes to come out and eat in the middle of the night, and they'll kill it. So you kill it yourself. And then you get out the tractor with the backhoe or something, and you dig a hole and you bury the thing yourself. The cabin that's behind me, it got moved off of the floodplain for the Cheyenne River out there. It was on a floodplain for many years. And then it flooded out, and everybody said, let's not put that sucker on the floodplain. Let's move it. So they got a machine, rented one from in town, that, big giant crane that can lift up a small cabin, haul it over off of the, thing and put it back down. And there was a porch on that thing that my uncles had made when they were much younger. And it was on the other side of this barbed wire fence that was out there that used to mark the yard area of this cabin. So we wanted to move that sucker up at once. We had two SUVs and a Jeep. I think my Jeep was there. And so in order to move that thing, what we did was we took down part of the fence. We used the fence itself to wire it to the wooden porch, and then hook it on to the hitches on, I want to say it was one of the SUVs, hook it onto the hitch of one of the SUVs, and then drag it across the field. And then when we were done, we put the fence back up, because that's what you got to do to keep the cattle out. But we didn't have any other wire. We didn't have ropes. We just looked around and said, okay, what can we use here? If you don't do it, it don't get done. There I had a mood from, everyone hit that, hit the like button for me, absolutely. Freedom Fighter 57 says, one thing about living in the country is that you just about have to be a jack of all trades and a good supply of needed parts and pieces to take care of small breakdowns. Yeah, I was going to get to some of that as well. Yep, mood. Thanks for remembering. Jeanette, yes, thank you very much for mentioning that. Always want to say, like, sub, hit the notification bell, share me on social media. It's the only way that I grow. But yes, as Freedom Fighter 50 says, you have to be a jack of all trades like that. And if you don't do it, it don't get done. It's not like you don't usually put something off. If something needs to be done, you go and do it. My grandparents, I don't think that I remember them ever taking a vacation. You walk away from a cattle ranch, things are going to go haywire. They pretty religiously, but not entirely religiously, because you still have to go out and check cattle 3 times a day. You go out three times a day, count count the number of cattle you got out there repeatedly, because in case one of the things gets through a fence and goes onto a neighbor's land, or does something stupid like that cow I talked about that had decided that it didn't care about the barbed wire fence and found itself in a position where it had to be euthanized. But yeah, they usually would do less work on Saturdays and Sundays, but not always. It just depended. And as you say, you really do have to be a jack of all trades. You can't just know one thing. It's not like me, I know one thing. But living out there, my grandfather had to know veterinarianism to some extent. He had to be an amateur vet. I remember one time we got to deliver a calf. Not something I'd want to do particularly. I was very young. Looking back on it, I'm glad, because I got to do that. But it means putting your hands places that you wouldn't necessarily think of as somebody who lives in an urban area. So you have to be something of a vet. You keep, as Freedom Fighter says, you keep parts around. You never throw anything away. My grandfather's back of his pickup truck was filled with tools. It was filled with pieces and parts of various things that he might use at some point and throw in the back, because it's a very good possibility to use it again. And you didn't throw it away. That place I was talking about where it had the fence that we had to take down and put back up, there was actually a bit of barbed wire that was hanging on one of the fences, rolled up barbed wire. And that's because at some point somebody had used it out there, thought they might use it again and put it up. We actually looked at it and pondered, okay, there's this barbed wire and rolled up here saying, maybe we can use that to pull the thing. Wasn't long enough, unfortunately, which is why we took down the fence and used it. Marshall says they use drones, RF tags, and AI now for cattle counting, but they can't find a Xerox. Yeah, that's all. All that modern technology is available if you got the money. Not everybody does, but you do have all of that stuff available to you. I know cattle ranchers that do that sort of thing. You know, put up the drone. Makes life a hell of a lot easier, you know, and the RF tags and all of that. I don't think any of my family out there right now is so well-to-do that they could necessarily afford it, but the neighbor who is buying up a bunch of their land, he probably can. He's big enough that he probably can. You have to know how to be a doctor to a certain extent. Certainly for things that are going on that are almost anything is very complicated, you go into town for the doctor. But one of my uncles did not wait to get to the hospital. My grandfather delivered him. I always remember there's rattlesnakes out there. Very early, I was taught how to treat a rattlesnake bite. Because if you're bit by a rattler, you have one choice. You can treat yourself and get in the car or the truck or the SUV or the Jeep in my case and race to town as fast as you can, fighting the onset of the poison, or you can lay down and die where you are. That's just the way it goes. You have to be very self-sufficient, and as Freedom Fighter says, you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to know a lot of different things. You can't just, like I can, take the car 4 blocks to the mechanic. You know, the car, it's going to be in town by maybe an hour. That's how far out my grandparents were. I always like to say, the ranch land where this thing is right now, it's 2 miles to the nearest gravel road. It is another 45 or so to the nearest paved road, and another 10 miles or so from there into Wall, South Dakota, which is a tourist trap, but the actual physical non-transient population is only a couple of thousand, maybe less. So you have to be able to do all these different things. If you have, you know, a mechanical breakdown of one of your vehicles, you can't just drive it into town or drive it a small distance to get there. You got to be able to fix that yourself. I remember many, many times my grandfather working on, you know, tractor equipment and all that, because that you're the only one who can do it. And if you don't do it, it don't get done. And modern ranching and farming involves a lot of heavy equipment. You know, people tend to think, oh, it's just putting a horse behind a plow. No, it's not. Modern farming and ranching in the United States feeds 1 billion people. The mechanization is so good, and we have such a surplus that we feed about 1 billion people worldwide, if not more. 1 billion people, you know, and the population of the U.S. is only about 240 million. And for those of you that were educated in the last 30 years, 1 billion is 1,000 times a million. So, you know, it's good 3/4 more than the number of people that are in the U.S. is what we feed. And that's because we have heavy mechanized equipment. You don't just go out there with a horse and a plow. You're going out there with plowing machines, a tractor with a wide thing on the back of it that's got lots of blades that goes through it, and you plow an enormous chunk of land in the first place. When my grandparents were out there and doing ranching, and this was before some of the even more modern technology that we have, he was out there making his own haystacks back then, right? You know, you cut down an enormous chunk of land, hay from the land, and then you stack it into your own haystacks. Today, that's totally automated. You drive along, and it takes the hay, rolls it up into a big giant roll that sits back there. It's not even a bale anymore. It's a gigantic roll. My kids used to play on them when we're near some. You know, that's about 3 to 4 feet high and 6 or so feet deep. You know, it just all totally mechanized, automatic. It just cuts it down, rolls it up, and dumps it out the back. Freedom Fighter 57 says, when I farmed back in the 80s, we had some primitive equipment, 2 old John Deeres and a Case tractor with a two-row corn picker. Yeah. Spent the whole summer tinkering with the equipment. Yeah. Well, you have to be able to do all that. It's not like you can take it into the garage. You have to have that mechanical ability. And like you say, there was some older equipment then. Nowadays, there's so much heavy equipment involved. Heavy diesel equipment, I might add. Red Cortez, and those of you who are environmentalist nut jobs, it needs to be diesel. There are no electric versions of those vehicles at all, and there never will be. And you don't go to the gas station to get diesel. My grandfather had a big, giant tank, above ground tank. And once or month or every other month, one of those big oil tanker type trucks, tractor trailers, would come out and fill it. You don't get to go into town to get your gas. You get to do it right there. And it's diesel because the engines on all of that equipment are diesel. Marshall says, and that heavy equipment is somewhat autonomous. Harvesters, for example. Yes, some of it is. Like I say, those things that make the giant hay bales, yeah, you got to drive it. But there's a lot of stuff going on in that equipment in order to spit out that hay bale. My grandparents were a little behind the curve at the time, but at any time that I knew them, they'd been ranching anywhere from 20 to 40 years. They had. That's another thing, by the way. When you get rid of stuff, you don't necessarily throw it away. My grandparents had a chunk in their land where it was where the old cars went to die. In fact, my father had a 1941 Ford of some kind, a two-door Ford, that he bought on the cheap for his very first car. It died within the first couple of weeks. It was so bad, he tossed it out there with all the other old cars that were busy rusting. Many years later, when my grandparents finally retired, he hauled that thing out of there, got it specialty, antique plates, and it's sitting right now up in the garage in my mother's house. I think it goes to, when she passes away, it goes to one of my nephews. It's drivable. It needs some work still. My dad was ill enough, but towards the end that he just didn't have time to do it, wasn't capable of doing it. But if my nephew wants to restore it, it'd be a perfectly fine antique car. But it sat out there in that field for 20 or 30 years. My grandparents had some really old tractor. Very large. It was still very large, even though it was very old even when I knew it. But it didn't have like rubber tires. It had a steel tire. That's how long some of the ranching had been going on out there. But in any case, you need to be able to drive that heavy equipment, which is not unusual. I learned to drive at age 12. I learned to drive at age 12 out of my grandparents' cattle ranch. My grandfather taught me to drive out there because by age 12, you're getting old enough where you can start to do some of those chores where it involved driving. I remember many times I would drive just by myself. Once I knew how to drive and he trusted me, I would drive by myself because he would be doing something outside the car or the pickup, and I could drive myself. But when you get to be a certain age, where you're going to be able to be responsible, guess what? You get to go to some of the heavy equipment when you're young. So it starts very young out there. And, you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to know a lot of different things, which is the biggest difference. You have to be very self-sufficient, do a lot of different things, whereas here, where I'm living in the city and where I grew up and where I spent my entire professional career, you can get away with only knowing one thing in depth, like I know computers in depth. But I don't know much of anything else. There are some things, fortunately, that I did learn working out there that I can translate to things around the house. I can do fences rather nicely if I need to. Am I old enough and my lower back's bad enough that anymore I hire somebody to do it? But if I needed to run a fence, I could do that because, Lord knows, I've been involved in running long-assed barbed wire fences out in the 110-degree heat on the prairie, more times than I like to count. And that's another thing, by the way, when you're farming or ranching, particularly ranching, you only have one source of light, and it is the glowing ball of in the sky. So that's the time that you work, when the sun is up. If you got something pressing, you're up at, I remember we were up at 6 a.m. all the time to go out and check the cattle for the first time, because that's when the sun was coming up, was at 6 a.m. Generally checked them for the last time in the evening, well before dusk, but that's your light source. You work, when it's up, which is why out there I was, working with my grandfather on lots of barbed wire fences in the middle of the summer heat, because that's when you did the work. This is part of the reason, by the way, that people in rural areas, it's only part of the reason, but it's a big one, why people in rural areas really don't vote for Democrats very much, particularly in recent history. Democrats are socialists and communists. It's just that simple. The party is clearly veering toward outright communism. And that doesn't work if you are a generalist. Part of the reason that people in metro areas tend to vote Democrat is they have this web of interconnectedness. I can't do a lot of things. I rely on other people for a lot of tasks, and they rely on me for certain tasks, computer-related ones. We all rely on each other to some extent. When you get into that kind of web of interoperability and relying on other people, that's when people start to think, hey, it would be nice if this, that, or the other thing was free. And the more free things that you're supposed to get, the more free things that, government is taking over, and the fact that you're handing out 50% of your freaking income to make these free things that don't compete on the market and so don't get cheaper with higher quality. People tend to lose sight of that, but that's why metro areas, I think, tend to vote Democrat, because they have a more tendency, by virtue of this web of interconnected people and businesses and stuff, to think that socialism is good. Whereas if you're out there in the middle of nowhere and you're responsible for everything that happens in your life to a large extent, becoming socialist is something that's a complete anathema to that way of life, a total anathema, diametrically opposed. So when socialists come in and they talk about doing all of these things that's going to be free, and if you do any work very long in agricultural work, you know damn well there's no such thing as free. Everything comes with a price, whether you see it or not. But when you come out and say, yeah, we're going to completely alter the way that you work. Oh, by the way, we're going to get rid of cattle ranching entirely. We're going to get rid of, dairy farming entirely because it's wrong and it's evil, blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, they're not going to vote for you. They're not going to vote for you, and they're never going to vote for you. Freedom Fighter 57 says most of the kids these days have none of the old skills to be self-sufficient. They found that out in South Africa, yes, where they ran the farmers out, and now they're begging them to come back. Yeah, that's the thing. If you're growing up in an urban area, I love to watch people who've grown up in urban areas talk about how to revolutionize farming and ranching. I tell them, you get out to western South Dakota. In fact, you call it West River, because there's a clear dividing line. It's the Missouri River that divides the state in half. East of the Missouri River, the soil starts to become something you can grow stuff in. West River, the only thing that'll grow out there reliably is grass. And by the way, marijuana, which is why them having marijuana totally legal in South Dakota is such a good thing, because now it's going to become a cash crop for them. But anyway, about the only thing that'll grow out there is grass. It's a natural prairie for a reason, right? So about the only thing that'll grow out there is grass. And I've told this to people who say, oh, well, you can turn all that ranch land into farmland. I'm like, no, you can't. Some years you have a hard time even getting water out there to grow the grass. And my grandfather and my relatives always say that if you want to really make money at cattle ranching, if you don't want to be dirt poor like they were, you have to have a large spread, a large geographic area that you own, because you want it to be large enough that the weather can be different in different parts of it. You don't want to be tied to the weather. So if you got a drought in this part, you can take the cattle and move them over to somewhere where there's not a drought. But some years there's no rain to speak of, no precipitation. It's really bad, and it's hard to even grow anything, and nothing else is going to grow out there. And they say, well, this is no problem. You can use vertical hydroponics. I'm like, dude, if that worked, they'd have done it a long time ago. You don't know the first damn thing about agriculture. And some of the people who do worry about things like, the collapse of the economic system, when I tell them that would collapse agriculture, and a whole bunch of people in cities would starve. And they're like, no, I can grow a garden. Do you have the slightest idea how many acres is required to feed a family of 4? And oh, by the way, you don't just plant things and the next day they're there. It takes a while for them to, not a clue, totally no clue. Those of you who think that's possible, that you can turn relatively dry areas like West River, South Dakota into farmland, you are completely fooling yourselves. If you think that this vertical farming will work, you're completely fooling yourselves. If that worked, it's technologies that have been around forever. If that worked, they would have done it already. You're completely out of your depth. You have no idea whatsoever. Yes, Marshall says hydroponic works, but it's not scalable. You're not going to put it into hundreds of acres. My grandfather used to spend a ton of money getting irrigation out there, just a ton of money, and said after he was done that he wished he hadn't bothered. It cost way too much money, and really he didn't see much of a return on it. It's just, if you've never done it, trust me, you have no idea. I never made a living off of it. I have just been around it enough to be able to speak intelligently about it. I don't want to say anything about how, ranching is on a day-to-day basis. You send me out there, right? Well, my back is terrible. I could not do that work now. If I had been out there doing that work my whole life, I think maybe I'd be able to cope with my back. But now, if I go out there, well, the likelihood is I'm going to do like I did 2 days ago, screw up my sciatic nerve, and be in bed for a week. If one time I screwed up my sciatic nerve so bad, I really was in bed for a whole week. This one isn't that bad, but only because I went in and had a steroid injection 2 days ago. If I hadn't, I would be on my back right now, and I would not be doing the stream. Even as it is, when I get up now, when I get out of this chair finally, it ain't going to be fun. But I tried to do that level of work out there today, I'd fall apart. But I have a second cousin or somebody like that. I see him from time to time when I've gone out to this, That's another thing, by the way. You're generally very friendly with your neighbors, even if you don't see them very frequently, which is kind of normal. But when they're over, you sit and you jabber, just sit and chew the fat, sometimes for hours. I had him, the last time I saw him he came by this cabin and we sat down and we just shot the fat for about 2.5 hours. He's like in his late 60s, early 70s. And he's still doing that amount of work out there. He's about to retire. But that he made it that long amazes me. The sheer amount of physical labor that goes into it. He's just had a lifetime of it, so he's used to that. But you send me out there, I'd die. I'd just plain die. And as Freedom Fighter 57, it says, if you live in an urban area, if you're my age or younger and you've never lived outside of it, forget it. You try to go out and do something like that out there, you will die before you learn enough skills. I've often thought, if the crap hits the fan, what would I do to keep my family alive? Well, I would try to get them out to this land. And I know that my days would be numbered for a variety of reasons, largely to do with my medication. My days would be numbered. 3 months tops, and then I'd be dead. So I think the only thing that I would be able to do is say, okay, I can't really show you how to do some of this work because I would kill myself. You even get less time out of me than the 3 months that I'd have. So the best I can do is take people and say, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. I am teaching you now what little I know. And there's a lot that I don't know that you're just going to have to learn by trial and error. And maybe I would impart just enough of my knowledge to keep them alive. But I don't know for sure. And that's me. And I've been out there from time to time. I mean, I spent summers out there doing real work. But now I don't know enough of the skills. The best I can do is like retire to this place. That's about the best I can do. I can't actually do the work. And and people are younger than I who've never been out there, even my generation, if you've never been out there, And you say to yourself, oh, that would be easy. No, it ain't. Are you prepared to work dawn until dusk on tasks like running a fence, putting holes in the ground, or these days, pounding in fence posts, and then running taut barbed wire between them for miles? Are you really ready for that? Or if you don't have fence steel fence like they do now, steel fence posts, my father boggles my mind because I've seen it. But he and a great uncle of mine spent a summer running a fence up and down what little there was in terms of rough terrain, and it was rough. Running a fence up and down that, they did not have the steel fence posts. They made wooden fence posts out of what wood they could find. And that means you get to dig the hole. You get to dig a hole, put the fence 3 feet into the hole, and then cover it up, and it's got to be sturdy enough that you can run taut barbed wire between them. That one boggled my mind. I mean, I can conceive of how it was done. Thank God I never had to do it. Steel fence posts. Marshall says, if you're serious about protection, get a solar charger for my cell phone, put a ton of farming ebooks. It's not a bad idea. I mean, I do worry a lot about economic collapse. And an economic collapse would collapse the food supply chain, and a lot of people would starve to death. Freedom Fighter 57 says, once your garden starts producing, the work continues. Yes, we have a stove in the barn for all the canning that needs to be done so you can have food stored up for the winter. Yes, that's another thing, you guys in the city who say, oh, I'll just grow a garden. Really? How are you going to keep the food fresh in the winter? How are you going to do that? There's all of these things that you have to know. And as Freedom Fighter 57 says, the problem really is, unless you grow up doing it, you don't have those skills. The last time, or the time before last, when I was out to this ranch land, it warmed my heart quite a bit because it's pretty rare. The number of people in agriculture is dwindling. Partly that's because we've got some really good equipment that will automate some of what required human labor. But it's also partly because if you run a small operation, at least in ranching, and I can't speak to farming about it, but in ranching, if you run a small operation, you aren't that wealthy. You're not wealthy at all. My grandparents, for their entire time that they were doing it, were poor as church mice. Absolutely. If you looked at their income, it would be below the poverty line. As I say, you need to have a large spread. And now there's a neighbor who is much bigger, that as my relatives start to sell the land and be retiring and everything, he's buying all of that up. And it's displacing human beings. But last time I was out there, I did see a father and his 12-year-old son working, and I was like, oh, good. At least there's some people still out there that are doing multi-generational ranching. That is largely about what I've got to say about agriculture. And I got a lot of other things I'm talking about tonight. But, Vice President Harris, if you want to know about this stuff, watch my stream. You can even interact with me. I will answer all kinds of questions. But you are totally ignorant. Just unbelievably ignorant. Far more, I kind of have come to expect it out of urbanites now. Not only do you not know all these skills, not only do you not know the difference, but you have now spent better part of 60 or so years with television that tends to show people as nothing but buffoons if they live in rural areas. It's one of the reasons I always like to praise Superman and Lois, because they're being kind to us. They're not showing people as buffoons. They're being nice. They're showing people who have, in fact, modern technology for the most part and are not idiots. But, since about the Beverly Hillbillies, people have been shown and betrayed as complete idiots in rural areas. And that's not true. My grandmother, because she was born in a time where it mattered. There was a time, education, as I like to talk about, has been a steady decline over several generations. And when she graduated from high school, which was very meaningful back then, by the way, a lot of people only went through 8th grade, not because they were stupid, but because 8th grade would today give you the same level of knowledge as if you had a general studies bachelor's degree. That's how far it's gone down. So my grandmother, who went all the way through high school and got what would today be the better part of some kind of bachelor's, she always said, oh, I could never go to college. And I'm like, yes, you could. You certainly could go to college. Today it would be a snap for her to go to college. You know, if she was still alive, the education that she got in a one-room schoolhouse, you know, circa, I guess about 1920, is so much better that she would have no problem going to college. I always like to tell my kids and great niece and nephew and stuff, like to point out to them that they are the end result of a lot of very smart people getting together over a number of generations. They are incredibly intelligent, frighteningly so in some cases. My ex used to describe our daughters as frighteningly intelligent. Marshall is saying, I'm seriously looking at modifying a farm bot, a CNC garden machine, for North Carolina weather and building a few of them for various small plots of land. Not cheap, but it'll work. If you got the money, sure. Yeah. Anyway, Vice President Harris, you are so ignorant. Far more ignorant than I would have expected from a politician, particularly one whose state includes a lot of agricultural land. You are completely ignorant. And this is also part of the reason that people in rural areas have a really hard time voting for Democrats. You know, Republicans are probably also ignorant. This is not something that's limited just to Democrats. They're also probably very ignorant, but they don't go around acting like they know stuff like that. They don't go around making incredibly ignorant statements, like people in rural areas have a hard time copying their IDs. You know, they don't make incredibly ignorant statements like that. They tend to shy away from saying extraordinarily stupid things. And that's part of the reason that people in rural areas have a hell of a time voting for Democrats, because you guys are so ignorant and so out there about how ignorant you are and how you think about people in rural areas being dumb and not having technology and all of that, that they feel like you're insulting. It's one of the reasons I do the show, try to educate people in urban areas, because when you're so ignorant and you are so out there with your ignorance, you know, like people who say, oh, I'll just grow a garden for all my food, and not understanding what's required to grow a garden for subsistence, you guys are insulting when you talk to us about stuff like this. Outright, downright insulting. And people watch you campaign and go, oh, God, I can't even watch this person. Not only are they talking about destroying my way of life in a way that'll make it impossible to feed 1 billion people, not only that, but they're also totally talking down to me. A few years ago, I don't remember when exactly, it was after Trump got elected, shortly after that, and the guy who was the president of, I'm forgetting, one of the big database companies, Marshall will probably remind me. Anyway, he said that what he was going to do was get a train and to go on a tour through rural areas to talk about why Democrats are so great and socialism and all that great. And we're all just like, a train? You can't get on an airplane and come into our airports like a normal person? You think a train is the right way to do it? You doofus? What do you think, you're going to be stopping along the way in the middle of agricultural land where nobody is and nobody's going to hear you talk? What is that? Do you think we don't have airports? What? That is so condescending. And so people have a really hard time voting for Democrats for that variety of reasons. The way of life one, and not understanding what's required to feed 1 billion people is one of the big ones. But every time you talk like Kamala Harris has done, you come off as insulting. Yes, Larry Ellison, that's who it was, who decided he was going to go on a tour on a train. I never heard about it again. I assumed that it died an ignoble death. But that was just insulting. Even the Democrats that I knew I was living in Des Moines, even the Democrats I knew living in Des Moines said, oh, that's stupid. Fly into the Des Moines airport like a normal person. Anyhow, that's about what I've got to say about how we are not country bumpkins. You guys who think we are so ignorant and insulting about it. And if you ever want to win, and you probably won't, but if you ever wanted to win in a rural state, take this advice to heed. Find out what it takes to live here and why that means that they're not voting for socialists and communists, and stop being insulting about it. Vice President Harris. That talked about it. As I say, I have a lot of topics tonight, and I'm going to run the risk of going over 3 hours, which I don't want to do because of my sciatic nerve. But I want to talk about Cuba. As if you're watching this show, you probably know Cuba has had a significant uprising. They want to call them protests, but I think that's probably too kind a word. It's hard to tell what's going on in there now because Cuba has shut down their internet access, shut down a lot of the technology that's required to really see what's going on there. And journalists are now nothing but propagandists, so they're not going to do their jobs, which would be go there and find out what's going on and tell everybody. Libra Cuba, says Marshall. Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. I like to see what's happening because they appear to be finally, after all this time, have had it. Life is too miserable down there, and they've decided that they are going to finally rise up against communism. Good. It took too long, but, you're in a communist dictatorship. You don't go along with the plan, you get to die. So I like seeing it. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on there. I'm not sure if it necessarily lives up to an uprising, if it rises that high. But you're living in a communist dictatorship. Ordinarily, when you do this stuff, they just kill you. You decide you're going to go, and if you don't have huge numbers where they can't kill everybody, they'll just kill you. And if you got small groups, they'll just kill you. And that's really what Cuba does. It's what any communist country does. You go along with the plan, or they kill you. So seeing this, to me, is an awesome thing. They've been stuck with communist dictators my entire life, before I was born, long before I was born. They've been stuck with a communist dictatorship. So if they actually rise up, if they get rid of them, if they install some kind of useful representative government, and I would love to see them install a constitutional republic based on the U.S. Constitution and keep to the letter of it. I think that would do endless wonders for them. So I hope that this goes where it could to go, which is, getting rid of the despots. Yes, Marshall says. Freedom Fighter says they think that the amount of dirt on your hands from handwork is a measure of your IQ. Yes, talking about agricultural work. Yes, exactly. And it's not. It just means you did a lot of work. Marshall says you can vote it in, communism, but you'll need to shoot your way out. Yes, absolutely. Freedom Fighter 57 says Cubans are tired of working on the same 55 Chevys they've had their whole lives. Yeah, it's miserable down there. It's a third world country because it is a communist dictatorship. So seeing them doing this is, in my opinion, a really good sign. As long as the Cubans, the Cuban government just doesn't go out there and killing them willy-nilly, which I assume is a possibility. If you don't have the numbers, if you're not willing to do that fight, they may just kill them. The best example of a communist dictatorship killing people, there was a place in China, Tiananmen Square, in the 1980s, I think. I certainly remember it. Tiananmen Square in the 1980s, and they had a bunch of people who were protesting the Chinese government. They just killed them all, ran them over with tanks, shot them full of holes, just killed them all. The world was kind of outraged at the time, but that's common. I mean, look at China right now. They've got entire gulags, real live concentration camps where they're putting people of religious minorities like Muslims into them. That's what they do. You go along with the plan or they will kill you. So I'm hoping that the Cubans have enough of enough people that they don't get all killed. That said, them uprising against a communist dictatorship. Our press, the entire world press, as near as I can tell, are communist propagandists because they're not framing this that way. I know they're doing it. It is a reaction to communism, because when Twitter was still serving these guys, I watched a lot of what was going on there. I watched a lot of what was going on social media because it was the only way they were getting their word out. And to a person, they were all saying, this is because we're fighting against communism now. Every single one. But the press, and it really frustrated them, the press worldwide is framing this as if it's a reaction to lack of virus vaccines. Are you insane? Ask any one of them. They will tell you, no, we want to be rid of communism. Not having a vaccine? No. Sure, they're probably low on vaccines, but they're low on everything. Watch some of the YouTube videos. Maybe I'll find one I remember viewing that was very striking. They were going to Cuba with certain expectations and barely got out with their lives. They were told at one point, drop everything, leave it in the hotel room, go to the U.S. Embassy right now, or they're going to pick you up and kill you. That's how bad it is. So when the press worldwide, especially the U.S. press, is just disgusting, talking about how these guys are really just fighting for virus vaccines, that is just a level of propaganda that proves what I say over and over on this show: nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. And that is a perfect example. They're totally propagandizing for the communists. Just before I got on, go check out my Twitter account at SYLTales. Go out and check it out, because I posted a screen cap that I got from Reuters. They had a picture of people in a large mass. The picture was about how this protesting is going to increase the number of virus cases that they have. That's what this thing was about. They're saying, oh, you're going to increase the virus cases. You really should go home and suffer. That was what this article was saying. But they had a picture of these people, and the caption underneath it was protests against and for the government. Okay, for the government? Find me anyone. Go ahead, pick out in that crowd of people who's protesting for the government. That ain't happening. And that was Reuters, supposedly a trustworthy news source, who was telling you that. I'm hearing too that the BBC is propagandizing for the communists. It's astonishing. Freedom Fighter 57 says the jab is probably the last thing on their minds. Yeah, well, like I say, when you saw it on social media, they were really frustrated because they're saying, no, we're fighting for this. U.S. should be supporting us and all of that. And the press is saying, no, it's all about the virus. It's like, no, it ain't. And they were really frustrated because they're trying to fight against the propaganda in addition to having to fight their own damn government, because the U.S. and the entire worldwide press is just propagandizing on this. If you hear anything other than this is damn near an uprising or revolt against a horrifying communist regime that has made life miserable for them over multiple generations, including mine and later, then they are just propagandizing to you. Marshall says it's common knowledge that the protest vaccine availability or use of the American flag, and talking about freedom a lot. Yeah, and that's what they're doing. They're flying U.S. flags. They chant freedom. And to make matters even worse, for the first time in my memory, in the first time in my life that I'm aware of, a president is not coming out and supporting them. I have never seen a president prior to Biden who was anything other than highly critical of Cuba. I've never seen it. I've never seen it. And he's had to backtrack a little bit and not say kind things about them. But he does not condemn them the way that every single president of my lifetime would have condemned them. Biden is not condemning them, which is what he should do. Now, I don't think that necessarily means you should send any troops over there, although I was very enthused by the fact that there was damned near a flotilla leaving out of Miami, I think it was, to go and help these guys out. I think if you're a private citizen and you want to go out there and shoot the hell out of communists, do it. Form your militia and go down there and beat the snot out of them. Support the Cuban people. Absolutely. I think it would be a grand thing. You know, the whole thing about militias in the Constitution, well, if you want to make a militia and go fight somebody, there's a great one to fight. And the other thing is that Biden has said, his administration says to Cuban refugees, do not come here. So he's perfectly fine with letting just about anybody in the southern border. And always talks about refugees. And by the way, I'm totally in favor of letting political refugees come into the U.S. no matter where they're from. But then to say, don't come here from Cuba, a repressive communist regime whose policies and outright actions kill people, is totally at odds with what he's doing on the southern border. And the only reason that I can think of he's going to do this is for the simple fact that if you immigrate from the southern border, likelihood is you're going to vote Democrat. And if you come from Cuba, and you can see that our Democratic Party, our modern Democratic Party, is veering straight into socialism, you ain't going to vote for them. You're going to vote for the Republicans. That's the only reason I can think of that he's saying, don't come here. Unlike everybody else, he's saying, don't come here. And if you're one of those people who thinks that Republicans are racist, well, you just look at them saying, yes, let the Cubans come here if they're trying to escape. Guess what, guys? Cubans are not white necessarily. They tend to be kind of brown. So if you think the Republicans are racist, well, you have totally misread their positions on the southern border. And you can see it because these guys are not white for the most part. Freedom Fighter 50 says, only paid protesters are protesting the government. I haven't even seen one. I guess total propaganda on the part of Reuters. Marshall says the Biden-Harris administration has also discovered that it doesn't like illegal anti-communist aliens immigrate here as refugees. Yes, I was just saying. They're perfectly fine with people who could emigrate and vote for Democrats, but not if they're going to vote for Republicans. It's the only thing that I can see here. And it proves that saying Republicans are racist is a complete lie. All you're dealing with there as the southern border is an uncontrolled border that leaks like a sieve. You know, and it's certain because the Democrats are hell-bent on letting them all in. It is a certain that means they're going to vote for Democrats. But if you get somebody who comes from an actual communist country and let them in, they're not going to vote for Democrats, and that is the last thing that they want to allow in. So not only are they this close to saying good things about a communist regime for the first time in my entire freaking life, that's the first time a president has done that, they're also saying don't try to escape. So Americans, if you really want to help them out, form private militias, get on a boat, and go help them. Marshall says, Republicans have never been racist. Yes, they were born from the abolitionist movement, FFS. Yes, they've never been racist, but a huge percentage of the people that I know on the left, they bought into the propaganda of the last 4 years under Trump, that he was a racist, that all Republicans are racist. And they're not. They're really not. And this is a perfect example of it. Freedom Fighter 50 says Biden doesn't want people with freedom from communism on their minds coming here because they would recognize where the Harris-Biden administration is headed. Yeah, and not just them, the entire Democratic Party, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, woman who's on my short list of people to be the future ex-Mrs. Stone, should she decide that she wants to divorce and become involved with a guy who's my age and in questionable physical condition. But the rest of them, just a pack of socialists and communists, period. And, people who come from communist countries know what it's like, and they would not vote for them because of that. Jeanette says, love to help, but you have work in the morning. Okay, good night, Jeanette. Great seeing you here, and certainly feel free to watch the rest of it on demand, because I got a lot I'm going to talk about. all of this stuff. Then there's Black Lives Matter, and they have come out directly in support of the communist dictatorship, which should come as no surprise. If you've gone to their website, it's quite clear that Black Lives Matter, the organization, not necessarily the people involved with the protests, but the organization Black Lives Matter was communist to start with. But they have come out and have been just outright dead said that they support the communist government. Guess what, guys? If you actually got a communist dictatorship in the U.S., they wouldn't kowtow to you guys anymore. You know, you'd go along with the program or they'd kill you, just like everybody else. Marshall says, critical race theory. Oh, Johnny Arcade, sorry. I didn't catch it. I thought it was Johnny Arcade leaving. Critical race theory should be relabeled as concealing racist teachings. Yeah. Oh, my God. You know, I mean, I'm seeing now people on the left saying that treating everybody equally is racist. Beg your pardon? I seem to remember some famous black civil rights leader talking about the content of your character rather than the color of your skin. Who was that? Oh, yeah, Martin Luther King. I'm pretty sure what he was looking for was to be treated equally. And critical race theory, just absolutely racist. You know, I'm sorry. I spent my whole life treating people equally, and I'm not a racist. And no one will ever convince me otherwise, because I know what I've done and what's in my heart. And for somebody to come out and say with critical race theory, because I'm white, I'm somehow racist, and I just don't know it. You haven't spent any time in my shoes. Shut the frack up. But yeah, BLM is in support of these communists whom the president of the United States is not condemning in the most forceful language that he can, and that is totally different from every president of my lifetime. Every single one, even the Democrats, all of them, condemned Cuba for being a communist dictatorship 90 freaking miles away from the shores of one of the United States. Just amazing. Just amazing. So if you're someone who feels like forming a militia and getting on a boat and going out there and providing these guys covering fire, do it. It is long past time that the poor Cubans finally got some level of freedom. Marshall says, you expected something different from progressive socialists? Yes. The KKK, Jim Crow, anti-civil rights, and now let's discriminate against those we don't like. I'm surprised to no one who knows history. I'm not surprised, really. I am a little bit, because for most of my life, even the Democrats would say Cuba sucks, but not anymore. You know, even a president, even if he was lean socialist and communist, wouldn't say, I mean, he says, okay, we supported Cuban people, but every president in my lifetime prior to this would say, those guys suck. We're totally with the Cubans. No, we're not going to send you military assets and stuff, but by God, you have our total support in terms of policy, in terms of getting rid of that government. But no, we've gotten to a point where the president of the United States will not say those things. Astonishing in that respect. Is it a natural outgrowth of how they've been moving straight towards communism all my life? Yeah, it is. And on that level, I'm not surprised. I mean, I would have known, I did. At some point, we were going to get a president so close to communism and socialism that he wouldn't condemn these people in the strongest possible language. I knew we were getting to that point. Still surprises me when we got there. So, we got a problem with Cuba in terms of what our government's doing. That's just all there is to it. Had a lot of topics. As I said, I got a lot of things to talk about tonight. Some nights it's a fight to find something, and other nights it's coming like crazy, and then you screwed up your sciatic nerve. So I got a lot of things here to talk about tonight. One is how we have now government Jehovah's Witnesses going around. In their case, they're not asking the question, have you ever, thought about Jesus? They're saying, have you ever thought about the vaccine? Yeah, the government is now sending people out, and I haven't seen one, so I can't speak to it directly, but they're sending out people door to door to talk about the vaccine. They're not gonna force you to take it, but they're going to talk about it a lot. Now, I'm unclear whether or not, from what they've said and what I've seen, whether or not they're talking about going to individuals that they know have not been vaccinated to talk to them, or just going to neighborhoods that have a smaller number of people who they think have been vaccinated to talk door to door. If it's the latter, it's still stupid and it sucks, and my government has no place doing that, period. But if it's the former, that they're going to individuals that they know have not been vaccinated, how the hell do they know that? I mean, I guess it's because, like my mother, who did get vaccinated, I mean, she had to sign away things, and so they've got a list of people who have been vaccinated. But if they come to my doorstep, how did they know for certain that I haven't been? How would they know that? And what business do they have of knowing if that's what's happening? Interestingly enough, there may be a way to turn away the government Jehovah's Witnesses. I saw somebody who had a security cam on the front of their house, and they put up an official-looking sign that said, be aware, this home charges $100 an hour to talk to people about the vaccine. Put it up right on the door, and they had footage showing of these government Jehovah's Witnesses coming up to the door, reading it, and saying, let's forget about this one and go on. So I suggest maybe doing that. Put up a sign that says you'll charge them $100 an hour for them to talk to you. I'm not looking forward to if they do come to my door, but regardless, this is the sort of thing. It's not yet, in terms of it being really a horrifying thing to do, but it is on that level. It is this slippery slope, and it has been very slippery. Initially, when these vaccines came out, they were like, okay, we won't force you to get a vaccine. Well, we'll never have a vaccine passport. Well, we'll never have ID, blah, blah, blah. And we've been veering towards that. We won't have we won't be tracking, who you've been in contact with, blah, blah, blah. We've been veering towards all of that. Some of what they said they would never do, we're already doing. And now we're sending government agents or people who've been hired by government out to people's homes who have not been vaccinated to proselytize them and to propagandize them. I'm kind of afraid. What if they come to my house, right? If they come here and they want to talk to me, if I talk to them at all, and I may not, but if I talk to them at all, if I don't just shut the door in their faces, if I talk to them at all, my answer would be, it's a true answer, my GP, my general practitioner, advised me that I probably shouldn't take this yet. And that's because I am on a cornucopia, on a freaking, the number of meds that I'm on, high blood pressure, my diabetes, anxiety disorder, I'm on all of these things. And these, we know, do not have negative interactions. That's where if something has a negative interaction, you put two drugs together, they're fine by each other, but put them together and they have an interaction that's bad for you. Well, we know these things don't have that. Throw a new one in the mix, whose efficacy and side effects we really don't know. We don't know that there could be a negative interaction. So that's why my doctor said maybe not for me. Even though I'm in a slightly higher risk category. Only slightly. Look back at the beginning. You can see we don't really have a problem with it here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and never have. But if they were show up at my door and I told them that, what if they could find my doctor and then go track down my doctor and do negative things to them? I have had this conversation on Twitter, and there are leftists, communists, and socialists who want to punish my doctor for giving me that advice. The logic of it, they're like, it doesn't matter, if you have a negative interaction and you die, or something happens with your anxiety disorder and you get suicidal, who cares? You need to have this vaccine, because if you don't, other people are going to die. Look at our stats. We know that other people are going to die. But if they found out, what if they're the sort of leftists that would do nasty things to my doctor? try to get her license taken away, things like that. Do they know who my doctor is? So if I told them that, would they then go to my doctor? Would they demand to know who my doctor is so that they could go and punish her? I don't know. It's all a very nasty slope straight toward a tyranny. I've said this lots of times, but I mean, geez, this is nuts. This is becoming completely insane. Marshall says, just tell them that you have a lot of antibodies already in your bloodstream, then close the door. If they said that they were going to, hi, have you ever thought about talking about the vaccine? I'm probably going to say, yes, I have. Thank you, and shut the door. I'm probably not going to talk to them at all. But even if I did, how do they know, if they come from me specifically, how do they know that I'm not vaccinated? And do they know other things about me, like who my doctor is? Could I get her in trouble if I said anything to them? It's just crazy. This is just veering off towards, a tyranny, and it's all because of propaganda regarding this virus. I have said many times that this is something for people to do if you're trying to get a doctorate of some kind in like immunology or something. Johnny Arcade, going to be a lot of great Ring doorbell vids. I hope so. I hope so. We've got one of those on my door. So whatever the conversation is, I may go ahead and pull it off and post it. It's all over a virus who, if you're getting a PhD or any kind of doctorate, MD, PhD, whatever, and you want to go and look at the stats, what little math I've done, and it is admittedly so incomplete that I will only ever call what I'm going to say a hypothesis. It doesn't rise to a level of a theory yet. My hypothesis is that this is in fact a regional virus, because when I've crunched the numbers on what little I've crunched them, it looks to me like there are two major infection vectors. One makes perfect sense. It is population density. That makes perfect sense. The closer you are to people, the more, like if you're in an apartment building and you're breathing the same air, that makes sense. The other one is proximity to seawater, a large body of water like an ocean or a sea. And that seems to be holding true in what little numbers I've crunched here in the U.S. It seems to be holding true that after you get a couple of 100 miles inland, the infection and death rate drops dramatically. It may just be that something about this virus likes seawater. I don't know. I don't know for certain. Just the numbers that I've crunched seem like that. And it makes a certain level of sense when you look at Europe, which gets it really bad. United Kingdom. Well, guess what? Nobody in the UK lives more than 150 miles from the sea. Freedom Fighter says 9,000 dead in the U.S. According to the CVC. VAERS reporting system, which is lowball totally. No thanks. Don't play Russian roulette. Yeah, it's what my doctors advised me not to do. Freedom Fighter 50 says if 2 people die from tainted meat, they recall the whole batch. It's like some gigantic sneeze. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I used to work for a company that makes over 50% of the Girl Scout cookies in the world. We had an entire recall process that I was just in the major part of. The key component was the IT, because we track all the cookies that go out, and twice a year, we ran drills. We said, okay, we need to recall this batch of cookies. Just as a drill, can we do it? Can we get the word out within an hour or so to everyone who's ever bought from that batch of cookies? Can we get the word out and, get them sending those back? Yeah, absolutely. And it wouldn't matter how many people had become sick or, God forbid, died from eating a Girl Scout cookie. It wouldn't matter. If one person, they could trace that to food poisoning on that cookie, the whole batch, tens of thousands of them would be recalled. Absolutely. Johnny Arcade says, every time a wave breaks, it's like a giant sneeze. Yeah, that's the thing. I don't really know that much about it, so I couldn't tell you for certain. This is just a total hypothesis on my part. Girl Scout, good luck getting Girl Scout cookies back. No. In point of fact, we could recall anything. We were very, very diligent about that recall process. You'd be surprised. whole databases that were just filled with information that would be necessary to recall them. Now, I mean, once you get them out to the consumer, the best you can say is it's in this batch, look at the box. But if you're talking about the Girl Scouts of America themselves, absolutely we could get it back from them. As I say, once you got to the consumer, it's a whole other thing. But, when you're wholesaling and stuff, and it wasn't just Girl Scout cookies they made some for Keebler, for example. So if you wanted to recall that stuff, you could get them out of the grocery stores. That would be certainly possible, and we were very damn careful about that because there are a lot of laws that go into place. What if we can't? We would be in serious trouble legally and just ethically. So we would run those drills, and we could do it. And if we couldn't, it would have been hell to pay. Anyhow, my big worry about this is where they're headed with it. And it doesn't make it any better that now they're going with full-on censorship. It is full-on government censorship that they're getting into right now. What's her name, the White House press secretary, very recently, within the last 48 hours or so, started talking about how the government is now censoring for Facebook with regards to information about this vaccine and the virus. Not just relying on Facebook to do it, but censoring for Facebook. So if you're one of those people, and I was for the longest time, it says, no, Facebook is a private entity. They can, censor anybody they want. Well, they've just gone beyond the pale. They're now acting as a wing of the federal government. The federal government is literally telling them who they should censor. Sorry, you've just become a wing of the government. You have to be independent for me to buy that story. And for the longest time I did. But right now, nope, sorry, you've crossed the line. If Facebook, Twitter, the social media giants are going to say, yes, tell us what we should be doing. Sorry, you've just become a propagandist for the federal government. And so they're going to be doing that. They're going to be cracking down on people like me, because what I have to say about it would probably be some level of misinformation on their part. Yes, Marshall says it's past time for blockchain social media. By the way, I've seen your IMs. I just haven't had time to get back to you on it. But yeah, I totally agree. Blockchain social media, real decentralized blockchain social media. Marshall's been bouncing a lot of really good ideas my way. As always, Marshall, happy to help out with it. I don't have the wherewithal to code it, but I'm happy to be your beta tester. But we've talked about doing stuff like that, and that's definitely something that's needed, so that we take this away, both from the social media giants who are absolutely socialist and communist, period, just outright. But aside from that, now we've got government intervening with it. So Freedom 557 says, circle black girl Jen something. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember her name. Frankly, I don't care. When Biden was elected, we got to go back to my status quo with respect to politics, which is, I object generally on ethical grounds to anybody who's president. But in this case, certainly to Joe Biden and the Biden administration. It's very easy to object. And because of that, I don't care who these people are anymore. I just don't care. I can watch the nitwit saying that they're going to do things for Facebook and say, well, you just crossed the line, Biden, in your administration. Johnny says, you quit Facebook and Twitter 5 years ago. Best move you made looking back. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. What you're really missing there is a nasty addiction. There's an addiction that comes into play that's essentially an addiction to, I've forgotten, it's a brain chemical, but it has some of the same effects as opiates. And walking away from it's probably the best thing you can do. For me, I have to use social media for my marketing. It's just all there is to it. I need it for my marketing. But if I didn't need it for my marketing, I think I'd have a hard time walking away. Marshall said that when he quit it, it was about as hard as quitting smoking. That's probably the case. That addiction is not only bad, it's in the social media giants' business practices. It's an integral part of how they work, is getting you addicted that way. Dopamine, Marshall says. Yes, that was escaping me. It's a dopamine addiction. After I'm done, I'll put a link to the Psychology Today article from 2012. We have known about this since 2012 that talks about this. Psychology Today, by the way, is a professional magazine for psychologists. It's not some pop psych thing. We've known this for years, since 2012. 9 years now. We have known about this addiction. It is an integral part of the business model for these social media giants. Getting people to walk away from it is just about impossible because of that addiction. It's really hard. Marcia says, beta hell, I'll be node number 2. Hey, man, whatever. However I can help with that project, let me know. Short of actually coding it, which I can't do, but unless you're writing C and it's really simple, I can't really do it. But I'll happy to be node number 2. I have no problem with that. In addition to that, government is also working with telephone companies and ISPs to police your text messages. They are policing your text messages, intervening with your text messages to find the content about this virus and this vaccine that they don't agree with and shutting it down. Your text messages. That is astonishingly bad. Okay? As I say, this slippery slope has gone pretty damned far down. Working with social media, telling them what they should and shouldn't do, and now working with telcos to intervene on your text messages, probably to filter out if you say something negative about the virus and insert something else. You know, it's like when you get my, when I talk about climate change. If I've got something about climate change, you get a little notice under my videos. It's a link to the Wikipedia article telling you how climate change is all real, blah, 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 blah. And so if you're watching my video about, the scientific method and what parts of it are thrown out for climate change, you're going to get propaganda underneath my video talking about it. I assume the same thing is going to happen here. So there's that. I mean, it's getting completely crazy. And just to make it even worse, they want you to rat out your friends and your family. Johnny says we're going to need a lot of lawsuits. I'm unclear how you fight the government. I'm informed by the fact that my father, I want to say it was his 1988 tax return, they applied the 1989 tax rules to it and then wanted to fine him because he applied the 88 tax rules to his taxes and they wanted to apply the 89s. He fought them. He ultimately fought them. He ultimately won. He got into court and the judge said, you guys are idiots. And he won. But he lost. It cost him an arm and a leg to get there. And after he was done, he got audited for the next 5 years because the IRS was just sticking it to him and saying, you don't screw with us and get away with it. You're talking about an entity with unlimited resources. Unlimited resources. You have limited resources. You're limited by how much you can pay an attorney. They are limited by how much time they have. And the government can screw you over simply by saying, okay, we're going to file every day, we're going to file new things that your attorney has to respond to. So there you are paying an attorney $300 an hour every day, all day long, to respond to things that are being generated by a whole team of attorneys that the government's going to pay whether they're bullying you or not. I'm unclear how you fight them. Sue them for civil rights violations. You're still dealing with an entity that has unlimited resources, and you do have limited resources. I just looked at the IRS. They have unlimited resources. And again, getting to the worst thing in my mind about what they're doing now, the FBI wants you to rat people out. They say that you should be ratting out people who are extremists. But their definition of extremists includes people who think that the government has become corrupt, that it doesn't represent the people anymore. Well, guess what, guys? You've just described me. I never thought the government was anything but corrupt, and probably always has been, but certainly my entire lifetime. And I do not believe that the government serves the people at all. I haven't believed that for a long, long time. Freedom Fire 57 says, back when you worked for LT&T, they would not spy, phone tap anybody without a subpoena. How times have changed. Yes. And the leftists are all for it. They're all for all of these things. They want the government coming around, the Jehovah's Witnesses. They want the censorship online, in your text if necessary. And they want you to rat out your friends. They want you to say to the FBI, hey, this guy thinks that the government doesn't serve the people and it's corrupt. Rat him out. Not just me, your friends, your family. They want you to rat out your friends and your family. You know what? That's exactly what happened all the time in the former Soviet Union. It's exactly what happens in communist dictatorships. This part really blows my mind, that all of this stuff, there is a large segment of the population, because of a year and a half worth of pure propaganda, are now saying, yes, these would all be good things. If you think any of this is good, particularly when you're getting to the point of ratting out your friends and your family, if you think that's any good, then you, sir, are an enemy of civilization itself. All of this stuff is very, very, very damn bad. It is that slippery slope, and we have come way down. When you're being asked to rat out your family and friends because they're not leftists, you have gone into territory that is just like the Soviet Union. It is just like, frankly, Nazi Germany. Not hauling us all off to the boxcars yet, but it's the same thing. You know, Gina Carano, my beautiful Gina Carano, another woman on the list to be the next ex-Mrs. Stone, should she ever decide that she likes men who are older and of questionable physical capability. She got into trouble by pointing out that prior to, the concentration camps, the way that the government got to that point where it was okay to cart these people off the concentration camps was the government talking about how these people are bad, and got to the point where even their own citizens wanted to, discriminate against them, would be mean to them, be nasty to them. Well, guess where we are, guys? You want these people to come by my house, the Jehovah's Witnesses. You want to have censorship, and you want the government you want to be people ratting me out and your family and your friends to the government. You are an enemy of civilization when you want that stuff. You are heading us straight down a path that goes to very, very dark places. If you're in favor of any of that, you're going to head us down to that place that takes us to something like Nazi Germany, like the Soviet Union, like China. If you're in favor of any of this, you are an enemy of civilization. Let's see. Johnny says they make the process the penalty in the end. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Jenny Arcade says, I'm going to rat out people who cash in scratchers at 7 a.m. when everyone is going to work. Don't rat out anymore. Dalton Brazier, nice to see you here tonight. We have to stop looking at the government as the people. Yes, they are not. They're not. It is a pack of, power-mad sociopathic narcissists, and they're not even trying to hide it anymore. If you get into the point where they're actually saying, rat people out to the FBI, you're not even hiding it anymore. Dalton Bridger says, if the government is the people, then the Jews genocided themselves. Yes. Marshall says, the definition of militia circa 1789 was all able-bodied men of a certain age, excluding elected government officials. It was that way for a reason. Yes, absolutely it was. It was so that people would have the guns. And in this day and age, the tanks and the missiles and the planes to take on the government as it is, if that were ever to happen. If that ever happens, I'm going to do something on the show, which is I will very, very loudly say to people in agriculture, stop trading. Don't trade anymore. Let them start to go hungry. Starve them out, because that would be the best way to have that kind of a war. Kind of a modern civil war would not be good if you had to fight the government. You would be operating a severe handicap. It would involve guerrilla warfare, probably doing things like taking military bases first for their military assets. The best way to fight that war is to starve people out. The people who are going to be in charge of this, because, as I mentioned, in terms of the way the mindset is and the way that life is on a rural area, the people who are most in favor of this live in cities. The way to stop it is to starve them out. Farmers and ranchers, don't let a single cow or anything else off of your ranch until they capitulate. People in farms, don't let any crops, don't let any milk off of your farms until they capitulate. That would be the most humane way to do this. To avoid lots of death is for the farmers and ranchers to stop trading. Starve them out. Let them start to die. Let the cities start to have their food riots. When they're hungry enough, they will capitulate. Johnny Arcade said, when the well-being of the collective becomes more important than the rights of the individual, we are done for. They will justify murder. I think we're headed there. Good God, to the point where we're going to rat people out. What comes next? Do I get a scarlet letter branded to my forehead? Do I have to wear around a yellow star? Pink, maybe a pink, triangle would be better. If you don't know, that's what homosexuals had to wear. Freedom Fighter 57 says, I had a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses, JW, come up to me on their bikes trying to preach their twisted religion to me while I was working on my car. They said they wanted to help me, so I told them to pass the half-inch wrench. Yeah. Yeah, I call them Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not really, but Jehovah's Witnesses are known for being probably the most irritating and persistent religious zealots on the planet, showing up at your door and trying to get their foot in the door and not leaving until you will actually sit down and talk to them. Freedom 557 says they took off on their bikes, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. Yeah. When it comes to these guys, I'm just going to, say, oh, you're them? Slam the door. I don't know what they'll do after that, because I don't think they have the power to break down the door to talk with me about, the virus and the vaccine. But, we've gone to a very dark place. We've gone to a very damn dark place, and it only goes darker from here. What people are going to have to realize is that there's been a ton of propaganda. And for the most part, it is not, it's not reflecting reality at all. You have a press that at the best of times is incapable of reporting the facts. As I always say, I have an open challenge to any of my viewers or anybody that send me any news article. I would prefer it be print, because it's easier to, show print articles on my green screen. Any print article at all from any source, anywhere, and I will prove one of three things. Either that the event reported never happened, that it didn't happen as reported, or that if you strip away all of the opinion, the emotionally loaded language, and the filler, the facts devolve only to a few sentences at best. Last time I did it was there was another time after the weather report, but I did it once with a weather report. There's a video for it around there someplace. They aren't capable of accurately reporting the facts in the best of circumstances. But over the last 4 years, 5 years, they have outright become nothing but propagandists. First, they were propagandists, anti-Trump propagandists. Now they are virus propagandists. Just absolute propagandists. In my city, The press has been saying since forever that our virus wards are completely full and straining the healthcare system. But when you talk to the doctors and nurses who, in my GP's office, who have the rights to, I forgot the privileges, they call it privileges, hospital privileges. It's where they can go and treat patients in the hospital. The hospitals they have privileges at here, the virus wards are empty. It is complete propaganda on the part of my local press. And that's what it's been all the way through the press. I certainly think that you can get to places like New York City where this virus has been bad. But you can't project New York City on the entire country. It is, in fact, a localized phenomenon. And if the press wants to go on about how bad New York City is, more power to them. But when you come out here and you look at the stats that I give every single week, you can clearly see we don't really have a problem and never have. Shutting down all of our businesses and destroying our economy was pointless. It didn't help at all. The vaccine isn't doing a damn thing. If you look at our rates of decline, it started long before the vaccine was out. It is all nothing but propaganda to get you to hate and fear people like me. You know, I look at Scott Adams, right, a guy that I generally like to listen to his podcasts and stuff. And he started posting things like how great he feels, how he feels free now that he's had his vaccine. And that just today he said people who've had the vaccine, for people who've had the don't have the vaccine, it's a pandemic. For people that have, he said it yesterday, Wednesday. And I typed back, no. It's Wednesday for me too, because where I live, it is not a problem, and it never has been. So we have destroyed lives and fortunes, probably because there was a 100% increase in teen suicide over this last year. 100%, double the number of teens in this country committed suicide. We had people die because of propaganda about a virus that is in fact geographically local. We should not have had that at all. And what they're trying to do is make the average person hate some other group, which turns out to be very easy after 4 years of anti-Trump propaganda and trying to get leftists to hate people on the right, hate and detest them. And that's what they're trying to do with the virus. And it's just plain frightening, because when you actually have them being successful, and they have been, the press and propagandists were 100% successful in this last election. If they had not been so anti-Trump for 4 years, I think Trump would have won very handily this last election. But they were anti-Trump propagandists for so long. And now they are virus propagandists. And they are going to make you hate people like me. They're going to make you hate them. They're going to make you want to discriminate against them. That's already being bandied about by various leftists. How to discriminate against people like me. How long? How long before you do really nasty things? This is, as Gina Carano said, where you go before you get to the damn boxcars. How do you get a populace to hate someone else so bad that the government is then justified in doing anything it wants to them? Because don't tell me that it can't happen here. Clearly, when we get to the point where you're supposed to rat out your friends and family, clearly it can get that bad here. At the beginning of my lifetime, none of this stuff. Government, Jehovah's Witnesses going door to door, censorship of your phone and all that. Ratting out your friends and family, that was unthinkable. When I was born, that would have been totally unthinkable. No one would ever have done it in a million years. Yet after years, decades of propaganda, that's where we are now. You are being propagandized. You're being told to hate people that you have no reason to hate. It's total propaganda. For God's sake, look at it as the propaganda it is. Share this video around. It's total propaganda. You don't need to hate people this way, with a seething hatred, because that's what it is. I've seen it growing with the anti-Trump stuff. It is a seething hatred. People on the left have a seething hatred for half of their countrymen, and now that's being transferred off to whatever of us that haven't been vaccinated, regardless of the reason. You have a seething hatred for us that is based solely on propaganda. Hey, Drop a Tooth, nice to see you here tonight. Incoming Holocaust articles. Well, I mean, I've forgotten what the law is when you start devolving things to Hitler, but this is just a frightening place to be. It's as someone who would be on the receiving end of this level of hatred. It is a frightening place to be. Let's see. Drop Truth says, hi, nice to see you, Drop of Truth. Glad to see you here tonight. The beginning of this rebranded flu. 912 people have died in a population of 25.6 million. That's a lethality ratio of about 1 in 300,000. Yeah, it's really a localized phenomenon. It is actually a localized thing. You have to get into places like New York City that are really population dense and are excessively close to the ocean. And then you have a real problem. Come out to where I am, zero problem whatsoever, and never has been. Drop 2 says teen suicide in Australia has increased by 300%. Very sad. All due to propaganda. Totally due to propaganda. That many people died for no reason whatsoever. Freedom 550 says, I had an appointment with a clinic in your local hospital. At the same time, the local news was claiming that the hospital was overflowing with virus patients. When I got there, it was like a ghost town. Yeah, it's just like here. The press lies all the time, still are. But the state of our hospitals is nothing like it. Nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. In 41 years of debunking these guys, that is the only conclusion I can come to. Doesn't matter what the source is, nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. Fortified, Johnny Arcade says, I'm not sure what you're referencing. Freedom Fighter 57 is there brainwashing the kids in the schools to rat out their parents. Yeah. Well, that's what the Soviet Union did. That's what Nazi Germany did. Yeah. Rat them out. Marcia says, you've always been hated. It's useful because you can easily manipulate people who are so emotionally driven. Yeah. Marcia and I have talked offline about this. The art of management and stuff like that. Using psychology to get around people like that. Well, we may all have to learn that. Because we're reaching a point where things get very dark. And it doesn't help that the people on the right can see more clearly how the press has been manipulating people because of Trump. I was never a fan of Trump, but, I found myself in the position of having to defend him from time to time from the press's propaganda. Drama 2 says Western Australia are now attacking Christians verbally since they're the most anti-vax. Welcome back to bread and circuses. Yeah, I don't know, it hasn't really aimed itself at Christians, particularly here in the U.S., at least not that I've seen. But that doesn't surprise me. And by the way, I wouldn't necessarily call it anti-vax. Anti-vax here, at least in the U.S., means that you won't take any vaccines of any kind. And I think that's silly. We've eradicated all kinds of diseases and viruses. When I was born and I got it, chicken pox was a thing. It existed. Now it doesn't. My kids had a vaccine for that. Never had chicken pox. Probably don't have to worry about it. Maybe you need a booster at some point in their lives. But they never had chicken pox, and lots of people I know had it. Mumps, measles, all kinds of stuff that have been eradicated with viruses, with vaccines. But those vaccines are well known in terms of what they'll do. They've had plenty of testing, both prior to going on the market and now they've been used for decades and decades. This one has not. So I don't think of it necessarily as anti-vax. It's just not this vaccine. Thank you very much. Marshall says, mentorships available. Consult the main offices for fees. Yeah. Not that bread and circuses ever truly left us. Yeah, and I think that's probably indicated by, the popularity of really gory things like Game of Thrones. Virtually any video game that you play today that's really popular. GTA 5, one that I play more than anything else. Probably the one that I play is Half-Life and Half-Life 2. Those are pretty damn gory, and they have mods that you can get for those that make them gorier still. So I think that you're right about bread and circuses. The only difference is that instead of, so far, it having been real human beings, what we've been seeing is artificial, theatrical or, computer generated. But I think it's a bad sign, because if you're getting used to that level of gore and violence, seeing it around you every day in your press, in your entertainment, I think it makes you more susceptible to maybe being okay with it in real life. I have occasionally said, unfortunately, maybe we need a war every generation or so, a nasty war, where enough people are sent out that have to deal with real blood, guts, gore, veins in their teeth, and eating dead, burnt bodies. I hate coming to this conclusion, but maybe we need that, so that they can come back, because when you actually see that stuff, thank goodness I never had to, but when you actually see that stuff, I've taught plenty of veterans who did, when you actually see that stuff, you never want to see it again. If you get enough people who die, who are exposed to that kind of death in real life, they come back and they produce the baby boom generation. People who have sitcoms on television like Lucille Ball, who produce Star Trek, the original series, which has zero gore in it whatsoever. And you can't tell me that Gene Roddenberry would ever have put gore into it, because he fought in a nasty, nasty war and knew that showing that stuff on television was bad. Okay? Johnny Arcade says Trump was right when he said they weren't after him, they're after us. Yeah. Like I say, we're clearly seeing it. The government, Jehovah's Witnesses, the censorship, them wanting you to rat out your family and your friends. And the press is the primary enablers behind it. As I say, they won. They won the 2020 election. They did it. Their and tactics and that of social media, the big social media giants, the tech giants, they won that fight. And I think it's important for you to realize that they won, so that you can see how they did it, analyze how they did it, so we have some chance of winning again. Otherwise, you get people who hate you so viscerally that they want to have government flunkies coming around to your house. They want to censor you, and they want you to rat out your friends and family. Drop 2 says, anti-virus jab then. Yeah, that's what I am, yeah. Freedom Fighter 57 says, the people taking the jabs are the lab rats. Yeah, and you can't tell them or certain levels of doctors any differently. Mine, as I say, told me that, given the number of other medications I'm on, that it's a bad idea to introduce a potentially negative interaction, and thought that that was totally reasonable, because we don't still really know what the efficacy, how effective it is in a large population is, and we really don't know what the side effects are. And unfortunately, I think the government and the press are actively suppressing that stuff. I got there is no list, really, of people who have died immediately after having the vaccine. There is no statistics for that being kept, and probably never will be. The only thing that we'll know is anecdotal stuff. Who do we know that this happened to? Or we hear about this happening to? And that's not very good. That's not very good information. But it's the only one we're going to have. We will not have real statistics about that. Even if it was only one person, we won't have those statistics, and it's clearly more than one. It's just propaganda on their part. And as you say, they're kind of being lab rats. We don't know what the side effects are. We don't know what the efficacy is in a large population. We're finding that out with the people who are getting it. Well, no, it's real fun. What if that efficacy and side effects is bad? Well, guess what? All of our healthcare professionals had to take it. Let you think about the implications of that. Drop of Two says, how about traditional sports as circuses? I don't think it's the same. When talking about bread and circuses in the Roman fashion, you're really talking about a lot of violence. You're talking about gladiators. You're talking about, throwing Christians to the lions, really, with the blood and gore and guts and veins in their teeth. But I think that there's certainly been a thirst for that. Otherwise, our video games and our entertainment wouldn't include this as a matter of course. Such that you can get away in Star Trek Picard viscerally ripping out somebody's eyeball and then euthanizing them. A character, by the way, who'd been known forever and was very, very sympathetic toward if you watch that version of the franchise. Drop of Truth says, World War III is coming. We've been programmed through radio plays, books, comics, TV since the end of World War II. I've said since forever that I think another civil war is probably inevitable in the United States. I hope it doesn't spread farther than that. But I mean, seeing some of the same things in South Africa, by the way, that we're seeing with Cuba. It's a little bit different in South Africa. It's more of a reaction to a recently changed government. But I know from people who I know personally, one guy who is my oldest friend in the world that I've known since high school, but is a gigantic globetrotter. He has been all over the world. He has now touched all continents and been in an enormous amount of countries. I think I've told him, you should write a book about your experiences, maybe several, because I think you are probably the most well-traveled human being in the history of this planet. If you go back just a couple of generations, nobody was as well-traveled as he is. And I don't think you could find anybody now who is. But he's been all over the world and everywhere. Anytime I think about maybe expatriating someplace, I ask him what it's like because he's been there. And he's been to South Africa. He's been to Johannesburg. And that has never been a good place. The stories he tells about that are horrifying. So for them to have a significant civil uprising doesn't surprise me at all. It's not the same as Cuba, but I'm not surprised. Freedom Fighter 57 says, we're at war right now. The leaders of darn near every country on earth have declared war on their citizens. Yeah, I think that's probably true. It may well be that, if it comes to a shooting civil war, we'll have a whole series of roughly 4 years worth of build-up to it. The climax of, maybe more than 4 years, 4 or 5. It may not be that we get to a shooting civil war. It may just be a ongoing cultural war. But I think it's going to get to a shooting civil war at some point. But I think if you're part of the reason I do this is because, at some point in the future, I have a horrifying fear that 4,000 years from now, some Indiana Jones type person is going to unearth a Twitter data center and come to the conclusion that we were all complete idiots. Part of the reason I do this is, maybe reach some people who will say, okay, like the major topic today, agriculture is nothing like what, I thought it was. Or, okay, there is actually a sane way to go with these politics, as opposed to listening to these damn propagandists. So I think if you're somebody like that who has the ability to do that and leave some kind of record behind, or if you're somebody who writes and you want to do a journal of stuff that has occurred, I think that's going to be invaluable to future historians. I look at the Lewis and Clark expedition, and they encouraged everybody, no matter how badly literate or not, to keep a journal on that. And Lewis and Clark's journal in particular have been utterly invaluable ever since they made it, because they are one of the few people. That expedition was one of the few that documented the way that Native Americans were living from all the way from St. Louis out to the freaking Pacific Ocean. They were the only ones that documented that, and that is totally lost to history now. It is a major piece of historical documentation. So if you're thinking about doing any of that, please do. I think, 100, 150 years from now, it may be a very, very important piece of historical documentation. Drop 2 says the federal medical officer of Australia, Greg Hunt, said the people who take the jab are part of the largest medical trial in history and that it's experimental. Wow, he actually said that? Damn, I'm going to have to find the quote for that and make a shameless marketing meme out of it. Johnny Arcade says, it's true, the UK jailed a 12-year-old for being racist on the internet. Also, they're going to support the Taliban when they take power. Smack your head. Power smack your head. Yeah. Yeah, UK is even worse than the US. And in the US, I don't have the story in front of me, but they recently charged a guy with hate speech because he stomped on a blue and white flag that's symbolic of the thin blue line thing. Okay, I'm against. I think burning flags, the U.S. flag, is in poor taste. I think mistreating it is in poor taste. It tells me that you have no historical training. Your education completely failed you if you think that the U.S. flag is in some way racist or should, the U.S. stands for something horrible. Historically, it has stood for good things. In terms of the goals, it stood for good things. And if you think otherwise, then your education completely failed you in history. It's just that simple. You can look at the history of it. Now, where we're going now is someplace very bad. But if you were to look, even 56 years ago when I was born, when the civil rights movement was, finally getting equal rights for African Americans. Clearly, the U.S. stood for some good things. So I think it's in poor taste. However, as long as you own the flag, you can do whatever the hell you want with it. You can't come and take my flag and burn it, stomp on it, etc. But if you own one and you want to do that, well, I think it's in poor taste, but more power to you. So this guy who took a Blue Lives Matter flag, essentially, and stomped on is being charged with a hate crime because it was a Blue Lives flag. That's bad, okay? If you want to get him for destruction of somebody else's property, if that was the case, because I haven't seen where it was, but as long as he owned that flag, more power to him. He can do whatever the hell he wants with his own property. The whole concept of hate crimes was a bad idea in the first place, and this is a perfect example. Excuse me. Drop of 2 says it's been 5 to 7 continents. Your dad has been to 6. Neither of you have been to Antarctica. He has. He's been to Antarctica very briefly, but he's been there. My friend has been to a ton of places. It's just astonishing. As I say, if I ever want to know anything about any place, because I don't trust the press to give me real information about it, I ask him. And he doesn't stay in the nice hotels, by the way. He has always gone on the cheap because he's the biggest skinflint I have ever met. This is a guy who, after we discovered that what you see in war games in terms of opening the mouthpiece on a phone, a landline phone, and holding it to the coin box on the phone will allow you to dial numbers for free. Once he knew that was real, there was not a landline phone in a phone booth anywhere on the UNL campus that did not have teeth marks from the 2 pipe wrenches that he used to crack the seal on that. He would make calls like that from all over the campus. He was one of the early guys who would take all of his textbooks. He was an engineering student at the time. Take all of his engineering textbooks over to Kinko's, copy every last single page, and then take the book back and refund it. When I worked at a convenience store in college, and worked nights, he would come by at midnight when all of the food that we had in the convenience store would run past its code date. And instead of me throwing it into the dumpster, he would take bags of it home. He had them frozen in there for years. Huge skinflint, never had kids, has a wife who's an expatriate Russian. And let me tell you, she came out of the Soviet Union. Her expectations are a little bit different than most Western women's are, in terms of what she's expecting in terms of money. So he was an engineer, worked for Boeing, put away a lot of money, never really spent much of it, and he's always gone on the cheap. So when he goes places, he stays in like student hostels. Now he's got a lot of friends around the world that he tends to stay with by virtue of all this globetrotting he does. But like if he went to India, he did not go to the nice parts of India. He went out and stayed in places where it was poverty-stricken because his money would really go there. If you're going to a poverty-stricken place and you want to get a meal, well, $1 is a lot of money to them. You can get a really good meal for that. He, in fact, is suggesting, and I may take him up on it, that when I come into some money at an indeterminate point in the future, he'd like to take me on a world tour because he thinks, and he's probably right, there are places that I might like that are much cheaper than the U.S., and the money that I have will go a lot farther. Freedom Fighter 57 says, I'm looking for a new doctor after I asked your current one if you should take the jab when he knows you have a history of blood clots, and he immediately launched into the Fauci propaganda line. I'm very lucky. Mine is not like that at all. Drop 2 says, actual quote by Greg Hunt, the world is engaged in the largest clinical trial, the largest global vaccination trial ever, and we will have enormous amounts of data. Okay. I'm going to find his picture, make a shameless marketing meme out of him. I do that sometimes with quotes like that. I'll get a picture of the guy on one side, the quote on the other, and down in the corner of his picture, my logo and website URL. Because I want to share that one around. There's so many people who are saying, no, it's all proven, it's fine, and won't believe you. I just use the scientific method part of it. They won't believe me. So having somebody who's, authoritative saying something like that, awesome. Freedom Fighter said, you heard about that payphone thing from the UNL techs you worked with. Oh, my God, really? You worked with who had to fix them. Wow. Okay, that was my friend. He's the one that did that. He went around anywhere there was a phone. He got a pair of pipe wrenches, cracked the glue on the bottom of that so that he could use any phone on campus to make free phone calls. Now you know. That was my oldest friend in the world. Drop 2 says, Greg Hunt rhymes with cunt. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I thought of that actually when you said it. That's where my mind goes. Okay, it's been about 2.5 hours. And I do have one last thing that I'd like to go over. Something a little nicer. Talk about Superman and Lois Season 1, Episode 12 that aired this last Tuesday night. Well, as you know, the biggest thing that I like to go through on this, I'll say it again because I've said it a million times and I like to show the cards. Unlike most reviewers, I do not go through the plot, hashing it to rehash and rehash to say what I liked or I didn't like. I do a very much more in-depth reviews, generally speaking, not so much with these. How's my back going? It's okay as long as I'm vertical. As soon as I get up, it's going to be painful getting up. I know that. Anyhow, I don't go through the plot and rehash everything that I'm, saying what I liked or I didn't like. I usually will go through and talk about the filmmaking itself, and I'm going to talk about that some here. It's not going to be incredibly in-depth, but that's how my Superman and Lois ones have been on a show where I don't have that much time. But we will have to take it as read that if you sit through for this review, and it's the last thing I'm planning to do tonight, you have either watched Superman and Lois Season 1, Episode 12, or you don't care that it's spoiled for you. But in any case, we should probably issue a...
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. All hands, prepare for incoming spoilers.
Yes, it is a spoiler alert, and that is because I am a secret master of fandom, and that means that the fandom is strong with me. This is not a boast or a brag. This is just where you happen to find yourself after having watched, read, and listened to over 100 years worth of science fiction. Problem is that we secret masters of fandom are cursed. You see, we can't just see this new stuff without seeing the century that came before. We find out that there isn't that much that's original, and it often interferes with our ability to enjoy things. So talking about Superman and Lois, Season 1, Episode 12. that aired this last Tuesday. As I mentioned a lot of times, my one sole contribution to talking about Superman and Lois that other people aren't or can't talk about is geographical. Tends to be geographical. In this instance, the last new episode that we had, I'm sorry, week before last new episode we had, they showed Metropolis as being next to a large body of water, which puts a big problem in terms of where I can locate Smallville, given the proximity that they've established of Smallville to Metropolis. Still working that one out. I mean, maybe I can figure out a way to make it work time-wise. Maybe I can put a Great Lake in Kansas or something. I don't know. But I'm going to have to do something with that. So I'm going to leave that aside for this episode because they didn't do anything like that this time around. All they've left me with is the current problems that I already had. That said, I've said lots of times, too, that when you do a Superman TV series like this, it's a weird trade-off between having, super feats and drama. And this show has generally done that very well. And the drama tends to be natural. The family drama seems to be fairly natural. You don't have a dysfunctional family. Even when things bad happen to each other, they tend to keep it together and be okay in the end. And in this particular case, darn, I've forgotten the name of the family, but whatever Lana Lang married. That has been a semi-dysfunctional family as we go along, but as a result of things that have happened, they're a much more functional family. And we get to see that in this episode, so I think that's great. Drop 2 says, Critical Drinker's review of Loki was rather poor by his standards. He's getting too much like Doomcock and all the other revilers, madder than reviewers. I mean, we don't talk about Disney products on here very much because they actively support genocide. But I saw his review. I don't exactly disagree with it. There are places where I think he's maybe been overly critical. I would say about this last episode, the final episode of the season, I found it highly anticlimactic, and because of that, unenjoyable. Anyway, with Superman and Lois, as I say, there's this trade-off between superpowers and the drama. And generally, it's been good. This episode, too heavy on the drama. Yeah, we know things are bad. Superman's maybe been turned. And we got, yet another Zod-like alien. Thank you, Marshall. A Yasla, yet another Zod-like alien. And apparently, even Zod himself, he was going to take over Superman's body. Which is now such an overused trope. Please stop. Please stop. There's all kinds of, interesting supervillains from Superman's past. Use some of those. Stop with the Yaslas. Just quit. Just quit. Anyway, there was too much, not too much talking, not enough hitting. And it wasn't entirely organic this time around. I couldn't point you to anything specific, really. I just found myself going, oh my God, this is starting to feel like another CW soap opera. It hasn't gotten there, fortunately, but I was like, be really damn careful. Don't do this much because you're headed that direction. CW soap operas are where you get some nice, good action going, and then all of a sudden, pull on the brakes and sit down and talk about your feelings. And we nearly got there this time. It was such that I'm like, okay, please be damn careful. Be careful, be careful, be careful. You're in danger of becoming. Be careful. And the fact that I would even say that means that there's too much drama going on. Not too much talking, not enough hitting. Be careful, guys. Don't do that again. Be careful. Drop a True says, we want Brainiac. Yes, I know you want Brainiac, and I think Brainiac would be a good one to do. He hasn't been used except in the DC animated universe, and that's come up for like 20 years. Yeah, grab Brainiac. I think that would be a great supervillain. Absolutely. As I mentioned, there were things about it, going on with this trope of yet another Zod-like alien, Yaslas. That should not be something that people are able to make any kind of acronym about, guys. The fact that my good friend Marshall Presnell was able to come up with Yasla, yet another Zod-like alien, means that you've done it too much. Stop. 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 Be careful of all the talking. You're running a close risk. It was a very damn near thing this time around. The part that really made me slap my forehead we had a crossover. One of the characters, and I'm not sure which it is, I'm not sure who the character is, and I think he comes from Legends of Tomorrow, appeared on this show and mentioned the group that he's with. No, guys, no. No. The show has to date been apparently totally separate from that. Everything about it, aside from the fact that the two actors playing Lois and Clark are the same, everything else had been totally different. I mean, last I knew, they didn't have twins in the Arrowverse. They only had a single son. So where did we get this other one? Well, I thought this was totally separate, aside from the fact that they said, okay, we like these people who play Lois and Clark. But having that character from the Arrowverse on, oh, you don't want to do that, guys. The Arrowverse sucks. You don't want to cross over with them. You want this to be something that stands on its own. If you get pressured to put Arrowverse characters in, just say no. Arrowverse sucks. You don't want this show attached to it in any way. And I'm not sure how it could be. And I'm not sure. I mean, the son of Superman and Lois in the Arrowverse was, I've watched enough Crisis on Infinite Earths to pick this up. Was shown in Crisis on Infinite Earths as having been born in Argo City. There was only one of him. And the timing for this is, okay, if like last year, year before, this kid was born in Argo City, but now he's 15, what's the timing on this? Because we're now like 12 or 13 years out. So if you make this part of the Arrowverse, we're like in 2030, 31. Doesn't make sense, guys. Stay away from them. They suck. Just say no. Just say no. Next season of Supergirl gets a team up with Tyler as Superman, Tyler Hoechlin. I mean, he's been there before, but I just assumed that given the fact that his costume is different and it appears to have never been like the costume on Supergirl, these were all clues to me. And the fact that they have two sons, not just one, and the sons are 15, not just like 3 years old, told me that, wait, we're operating in a totally separate timeline where it's an alternate universe where Superman and Lois happen to look alike to the one in the Arrowverse. Guys, don't. Just say no. Just say no. The Arrowverse sucks. Stay away from it. I had heard that there was going to be a crossover with Batwoman, that the virus stopped. It was like, well, I guess that's one thing going for the virus. Stay away from the Arrowverse, guys. The Arrowverse sucks. Just stay away. Don't touch it with a 10-meter cattle prod. Get this character that was in this last episode, get him out. And I think they must have said that because he was there for like 3 lines. So don't do it. Don't do it. Get Brainiac and get rid of these guys. The Arrowverse sucks. It just sucks. Don't do it. That is about all that I've got to say about Superman and Lois. It was otherwise a decent enough episode. A little anticlimactic, to be honest, because they had again set up this notion that Superman might be turning and there's going to be this big giant fight. Now, I was glad that he didn't turn for the reasons that he did it. I thought that made perfect sense. But they set it up like there's going to be another fight. So I think, it didn't look to me like they had completely closed out this storyline. It looks like Morgan Edge has something going on that he did immediately prior to the end of this episode that made it look like everything was fine. But I think they're going to come back. I think they have at least one more episode. I think they're going to come back and we're going to find out that he did something that's going to lead to something else. But again, there's a problem with this. It came up in the last one where we had all of these super beings running around. If you're going to do that, if you're going to have that fight, do it. But if you can't do it on a TV budget, don't. So if we're leading up something that's going to be really big, either do it, give it to us, or if you can't do it on a TV budget, don't. Don't even try. Oh, really? STD Season 5 may be canceled, Drop of Truth says. Oh, we can only hope. We can only hope. I just waiting for that house of cards to fall apart and maybe have Star Trek sold off to a company who isn't going to hire idiots to run it. Like that hack fraud Alex Kurtzman and his mafia of character assassins. Anyway, like I say, the end of the episode seemed a bit anticlimactic to me. It seemed like it was missing a big fight, and it seemed like it was bringing an arc to a close that it probably isn't bringing a close to. But if you're going to do that, and you're not going to have the big climax be on this episode, you need to build it up so when we get it, you need to make it so it isn't like this just ended the way that it did. So we'll see. Most of the guys, stay away from the CW. Be careful about too much drama over, not enough hitting and too much talking. But it still didn't cross the line on it. I still thought it was generally a very good episode, generally well plotted, well acted, etc. Just a couple of things that didn't quite sit well with me, and you got to be careful because they're things that the Arrowverse in general has in common. Be very careful. You've not done it so far, So my voice is starting to go again, and my back is starting to hurt in the chair, which means getting up is going to be a screamingly painful thing to do. So I guess that is all that I have to say about that. I would love to keep the conversation going. So please leave your comments, your questions, and your nasty remarks. I will do my best to respond to you. And of course, do like, sub, hit the notification bell, share me on social media, because that's how I grow. Drop 2 says, evidently Klutzman spent the budget of Season 5 to finish Season 4. Really? Why not spend the budget for Picard Season 2 on donuts and Coke? We don't need that either. Yeah, I wish he'd just take all that and just blow it on, hookers and blow. That'd be fine with me. We'll see. I've heard about, the end of one of these shows more than once. We'll see how it goes. So anyway, that is all that I have to say about that, and thanks for watching Tales from SYL Ranch. And I'm Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.